Everyone says a woman needs protection to survive the Wild West. But at Love and Scars Stories, we know the truth is far more complicated. Today is the story of a pregnant woman who arrived in Montana with nothing, where heartbreak became resilience and solitude forged unbreakable strength. Out on the open frontier, everything began with one small act: a woman lifting an axe and choosing herself. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. She came into the Montana wilderness, owning nothing but the clothes on her body and the child growing quietly beneath her ribs. No husband waiting, no family behind her, no money to soften the blow. Only grit, raw, unpolished, and hands ready to split open if that was the price of a future no one else believed she could build. While other women searched for warmth in parlors and safety in a man's shadow, she chose timber and iron. She built her life plank by plank. That was when Wade Calder rode into her clearing, a rancher's son born into wealth, a man who had never gone without and had never seen a woman swing her own axe. He expected to find desperation, someone broken, someone needing to be saved. Instead, he found a woman who refused it. When unyielding will collides with inherited certainty, pride is the first thing to bleed. The cross resting in Josie McGraw's hands was worn smooth with age, much like the woman holding it. Her father, Oric McGraw, had carved every groove 20 years earlier, back when faith felt as solid as the oak beneath his knife. Now she sat on the unfinished porch of her cabin, tracing those familiar lines, wondering if God had lost track of her somewhere between Boston and this unforgiving stretch of Montana land. 3 months. 3 months since she stepped off a dust-choked stagecoach in Willowbrook, carrying a single carpet bag, $8, and a body that would soon expose her secret. The driver had stared at her like she'd gone mad when she asked to be dropped at the land office instead of the boarding house. Maybe she had gone mad. Sensible women didn't spend their last coins on 40 acres of raw prairie. Sensible women didn't try to carve a homestead out of nothing while carrying a child. But Josie McGraw had stopped being sensible. That happened the night Everett Langston walked out of their Boston brownstone, leaving behind divorce papers and a voice sharp with disgust. "I won't raise another man's bastard." She never told him the truth, that the child was his. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the colder understanding that a man who could abandon his wife so easily wasn't worth the breath it would take to fight him. Let him believe his lie. She knew the truth, and it would have to be enough. Morning light climbed over the Rockies, spilling gold across the grasslands and reminding her why she'd fallen for this harsh country in the first place. Out here, a woman's worth wasn't measured by silk hems or calling cards. Out here, survival outweighed whispered judgment. Josie set the cross aside and lifted her saw, letting her thumbs skim the steel teeth. Her hands, rough, hardened, would have horrified her Boston friends. But the wilderness had no use for polish or manners. It demanded strength, and she had found more of it than she ever knew she carried. The cabin's frame rose around her like the bones of some great beast, every beam earned through pain and persistence. She'd hauled foundation stones from the creek bed one by one until her back screamed and her shoulders burned. Then came the floor joists. Cut from lodgepole pine she'd felled herself, the axe had felt strange in her grip at first. 6 weeks later, it felt like part of her. Now the wall stood waist high, and for the first time she could see it clearly. A small, solid home. A stone hearth strong enough to hold back Montana winters. A place warm enough for her and the child she carried. A covered porch That was her dream. Somewhere to rest her tired feet at sundown, watching the last of the golden light melt into the mountains. Below her ribs, the baby gave a soft flutter, a tiny kick that made her lips curl into a quiet smile. 5 months along now, and no amount of loose fabric could hide the swell of her belly. Not that there was anyone around to care. The closest folks lived 6 miles east, Hank and Mabel Dobbs, and she'd only laid eyes on them once, when Hank rode out just to say howdy and offer a hand. She turned him down with grace. Stubbornness was her flaw and her fire. Even as a little girl, she'd rather scale the old oak behind the house than sit pretty with porcelain dolls, much to her mother's horror. Josie, proper ladies don't dirty their skirts, had been the daily song of her childhood. That and endless lessons in posture and polite chatter that felt more like a cage than refinement. Her father, Oric McGraw, had been her refuge. Oric understood her wild spirit, maybe because he'd once had his own. Before the weight of Boston business and a wedding ring pressed it out of him, he taught her how to carve wood, how to read the clouds, how to steer by starlight and gut feeling. But most of all, he taught her this. Worth isn't something you inherit. It's what you do with your 2 hands. That truth guided her now as she measured the next plank and set her saw to it. The morning wind carried pine and wildflower, so far from the stink of ash and manure back in Boston. Here, she could breathe without choking on someone else's grief. The sound of hooves made her pause. She looked up, eyes narrowing against the sun. A lone rider came through the aspens, tall in the saddle, easy and sure like he'd been riding since he could walk. Even from across the clearing, she saw the horse. Sleek, strong, expensive. Not some drifter or dirt-poor settler like her. Josie set down the saw and brushed her skirt. She could feel the sawdust clinging to her hair, the soil under her nails. Old habits die hard. Some part of her would always be that Boston girl who changed dresses 3 times a day and never left the house without gloves. As the stranger rode closer, his features came into view. Young, maybe 30. Dark hair beneath a sharp hat. Clothes that didn't come from the general store. His horse was a bay gelding, too fine to come cheap. He pulled up just short of her clearing. His eyes swept the place, the half-built cabin, the neat stacks of timber, then landed on her with something close to surprise. She imagined what he saw. A pregnant woman in a dusty work dress, hammer in hand, standing proud in the middle of it all like some rough-edged frontier Madonna. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His voice held a faint western drawl, softened by schooling from back east. "Name's Wade Calder. My folks run the Circle Ranch about 10 miles north." She nodded politely. The name meant nothing to her. She'd gone out of her way not to get tangled up in other folks' stories. Solitude was her sanctuary. "Josie McGraw. Morning to you, Mr. Calder." His gaze lingered on the construction again, then drifted to her belly before coming back to her eyes. The questions behind his look were plain, but he kept them to himself. "Quite the task you've taken on," he said finally. "Building a cabin like this. It's tough going even with a full crew of hands." The meaning behind his words hung there, quiet but thick, like a low fog at sunrise. That a woman, especially one carrying a child, had no business swinging a hammer out here alone. Josie had heard it a dozen times from a dozen men since setting foot in Montana, and by now her answer rolled off the tongue as smooth as creekstone. "Most things worth having take some grit to earn, Mr. Calder. I don't mind a bit of hard work." Something shifted in his eyes. Could have been respect, or just plain curiosity about this strange woman who'd appeared on his doorstep, or near enough to it. Like a riddle the prairie hadn't asked for. Josie found herself looking at him harder, noticing the way the corners of his eyes creased when he squinted into the sun, and how his jaw held firm like a man who wasn't used to being told no. Rich boy. Ranch bred, she figured. Probably hadn't worked an honest day with his own hands. The kind who saw women as dainty creatures needing doors held and decisions made for them. She'd married one of those once. That road ended in heartbreak. "I don't mean to pry," Wade said, swinging down from the saddle with a kind of effortless grace. "But I was riding fence and saw what I thought was chimney smoke. Just wanted to make sure everything was all right." Josie nearly smirked. Smoke, huh? That was a neat little fib. She hadn't lit a fire in days, and she knew damn well the line between their properties was closer to 5 miles, not 10 like he'd claimed. He hadn't come on account of smoke. He came chasing a story, a lone woman carving a life out of wilderness. "I'm just fine," she said, steady and cool. "But thank you. As you can see, I'm getting along just fine on my own." Right then, the baby gave her a good solid jab under the ribs. She flinched and put a hand to her side without thinking. Wade noticed, of course. His brow tightened, concern creeping in like an early frost. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but I'd be lying if I said this looked like the safest place for a woman in your state. Winter hits fast and mean out here, and you're a long ride from help if anything turns." And there it was. The belief that she needed saving. That what she was doing wasn't choice, but desperation. Josie squared her shoulders, her chin lifting just enough to catch the light. At 5'6", she didn't tower, but there was iron in her stance. "Mr. Calder, I know what I'm doing. I planned for this. I've got supplies enough to get me through the cold, and I'm more than capable of looking after myself and my child." "But surely you have kin. A husband, maybe. Someone who could—" "I don't have a husband." The words came quick, sharp like a knife striking dry wood. They sliced clean through his gentlemanly attempt at concern. "My family's back east," she added, her voice quieter but no less steady, "where they prefer to keep me tucked away in memory." The silence that followed was taut as barbed wire. She could see him trying to make sense of it all. The poise in her speech, the fine bone pins in her dark hair, the quality of her dress beneath its practical cut. She didn't match the usual mold. Not some lost soul running from shame, not a widowed settler making do, and sure as hell not a ranch wife waiting for her man to return. She was something else entirely. Something he couldn't pin down. And that unsettled him more than he probably realized. "I should let you get back to it," he said at last. But his boots stayed planted, his hands idle on the reins. "If you need anything, tools, supplies, a second pair of hands, the Circle H is not far. We'd be glad to help out." Josie McGraw studied his face, looking for the usual trace of calculation she'd learned to expect from men, the silent barter that help came with hidden strings. That offering a hand meant you'd owe them something later. But Wade Calder's eyes held nothing but quiet concern, and not a hint of that predatory glint she'd seen too often in the past. Even so, she knew better than to lean on anything but her own grit. "That's mighty kind of you," she said, voice calm. "But I'd rather manage things myself. Keeps it clear who owns what when it's all said and done." A flicker of a smile touched his lips, like he recognized a familiar fire in her defiance. "Fair enough, Miss McGraw, but the offer still stands." He tipped his hat and swung back onto his horse with the ease of a man born in a saddle. As Wade gathered his reins, he glanced back down at her one more time, and Josie felt that gaze hit her like the snap of cold river water, clear and direct. "For what it's worth," he said low, "I think it takes real courage to do what you're doing here. Not many have the backbone to start from scratch in a place like this." Before she could answer, he turned his horse and rode off the same way he came, leaving her standing in the shadow of a half-finished cabin, heart beating faster than it should have. She watched until the trees swallowed him whole, then shook her head and picked up her saw again. Men like Wade Calder were exactly the kind of trouble she'd come west to leave behind, smooth-talking, sure-footed, and used to fixing problems with cash and charm instead of sweat and steel. Still, as she went back to cutting the planks for her walls, she found herself glancing now and then toward the woods where he'd disappeared, wondering, despite herself, what had truly drawn him to her clearing that morning. Wade Calder prided himself on knowing his place in the world. The silver pocket watch ticking against his vest wasn't just for time, it was a symbol of legacy. 4 generations of Calders had poured blood and muscle into the Circle H Ranch, turning it from bare dirt into one of the most powerful outfits in Montana. His great-grandfather's initials were still etched faintly into the back of that watch. A daily reminder of duty and the weight of carrying a name folks expected to mean something. But that morning, riding away from Josie McGraw's land, that legacy didn't sit proud on his chest. It felt more like a stone pressing down. 3 days passed since they first met, and Wade had found reasons, poor ones, to ride longer loops through the range, always managing, somehow, to pass near her land, telling himself it was just neighborly instinct. A pregnant woman alone out here? She'd need help sooner or later, and he'd be close when that time came. That wasn't the whole truth, though, and Wade wasn't real keen to look too hard at what else might be driving him back. The morning sun cast long, low shadows as he neared her homestead again. He heard the rhythm of a hammer before he saw the cabin. Josie was on the roof this time. Hat pulled low, her dark hair tucked back, hammer in hand, working with steady resolve. The sight made his chest clench. Part nerves, part something he didn't dare name. "Miss McGraw," he called up, sliding off his horse and tying the reins to a pine nearby. "That's dangerous work in your condition." Josie stopped, shading her eyes from the glare, and looked down at him from the roof. Even at a distance, he could see the defiance in the tight line of her jaw. "Good morning, Mr. Calder," she said, dry as prairie dust. "Wasn't expecting to see you again so soon." There was a trace of warning in her tone, a subtle reminder that she'd noticed just how often he was turning up. Wade Calder felt a flicker of heat rise up his neck. When exactly had he become the kind of man who kept showing up where he wasn't invited? "I was checking the creek boundary," he muttered, which wasn't a lie. But it sure didn't explain the mile-long detour he'd taken just to get there. "Saw you working on the roof. That's not the kind of thing a person ought to handle alone, especially since I'm pregnant." She finished for him, voice edged with tired defiance. "Mr. Calder, I know you mean well, but I've been climbing trees and patching roofs since I was 12. This baby doesn't make me useless." To drive her point home, she turned and planted the next nail with 3 quick, exact strikes. Wade couldn't help but watch the way her arm moved, steady and practiced, the deliberate set of her shoulders as she laid the next shingle. It made every old-fashioned idea he had about how women were supposed to act feel out of place. "At least let me spot you," he called up. "I won't slip," she began, but her foot shifted on the slanted roof before she could finish. Just for a second, she swayed, enough to make his heart seize up. Wade didn't think. He moved. Climbing the ladder, she leaned against the wall faster than he thought he could. For a man used to horses and pasture, he scaled those rungs like he was born doing it. He reached the roof's edge just as Josie was settling back down, trying to hide the pale look under her hat. "I'm fine," she said fast. But her voice had a shake that gave her away. "I'm sure you are," he replied gently, planting himself firmly on the ladder, close enough to catch her if needed. "But humor me anyway. My mama raised me to lend a hand to women folk. She'd tan my hide if she found out I let a pregnant woman climb around on a rooftop alone." Josie cut him a look from the corner of her eye. For a moment, he thought she might bark at him to get back down. But then something in her gaze eased, just a little. "Your mama sounds like quite the woman." "She is," Wade said, smiling. "Keeps the books, handles every damn social event, and once stared down a charging bull just to prove a point. She'd like you," he added after a beat. "She's always had a soft spot for women who don't back down from a fight." Josie gave a dry little snort. "Does she know you're out here bothering lone homesteaders instead of minding the ranch?" The jab was laced with humor, enough to keep it from stinging, and Wade found himself chuckling, even perched precariously on the ladder. "Ranch business is exactly what I'm meant to be handling. My old man wants me to head over to the Vane place this afternoon, talk to Thaddeus about buying his breeding bull." "Then why aren't you?" she asked plainly. It was a fair question, and one Wade hadn't really let himself ask. Truth was, the thought of another stiff handshake, another tidy deal with the same neighbors he'd known since he was a boy, it bored him senseless. Lately, everything in his life felt planned out, like walking a trail someone else had laid down long before he got the chance to pick his own. But seeing Josie McGraw out here, building a home with little more than raw willpower and a few hand-me-down tools, it felt like watching something sacred. "Maybe I just wanted to see if you'd fallen off the roof yet," he said with a smirk, aiming for playful, though his voice caught something more serious than he meant to show. That's when Josie finally looked at him. Really looked. Her eyes, a sharp gray-green, met his like a storm rolling across dry grass. They cut through every polite line, every easy smile he tried to wear like armor. "You don't know a damn thing about me, Mr. Calder," she said, low and steady. "For all you know, I could be a fugitive on the run, or a con artist looking for her next target." "Are you?" Wade asked, his voice low. "Would I tell you if I were?" Josie replied, half daring him. Wade studied her face like it held some unsolvable riddle. There was something about Josie McGraw that didn't add up. And that's exactly what made her so damn fascinating. She spoke with the grace of someone well-educated, but her palms were tough as saddle leather. There were fancy pins in her hair, yet her hair hadn't seen a brushstroke of vanity in months. And despite being out here alone with nothing but lumber and grit, she carried herself like someone who used to command rooms, not cabins. "No," he said finally. "But I don't reckon you are either. A criminal would be better at hiding," he added, "and a con woman wouldn't be hammering shingles under the desert sun." Josie didn't argue. She just went back to setting another shingle, hand steady as ever. "Sound logic," she said. "Though it strikes me you're basing that logic on very little." "Sometimes," Wade replied. "You've got to go with your gut when it comes to people." She didn't look at him this time when she asked, And what does your gut say about me? That question hit the air like a crack of thunder, soft but sharp and heavy with unspoken meaning. Wade wasn't ready for it. Truth was, his gut had been shouting ever since he first laid eyes on her. Shouting that she was unlike any woman he'd ever known. That her strength was real, not show, that she carried hurt deep under that stubborn chin of hers. And he couldn't stop wondering who'd put it there, or how he could help carry some of it. But most dangerous of all, his gut told him he was getting tangled in her life in a way that wouldn't be easy to undo. "They tell me you are exactly what you appear to be," he said carefully. "A woman with grit and fire who chose to stake out her own place in a world that doesn't make that easy." Josie's hammer stopped at the mid-swing. Slowly, she looked over her shoulder. "And what do your instincts say about why a woman might make such a choice?" The crack in her voice was nearly invisible, but it was there. Wade felt it like a draft through a closed window. For all her boldness and tough edges, there was something raw beneath the question. Something that asked for more than just words. It asked for respect. He met her gaze. "They tell me it ain't my place to know, unless you decide to tell me." For a breath, something shifted in her. He caught the brief flicker of relief in her face, too fast to hold on to, but real all the same. "That's a refreshingly sensible answer, Mr. Calder." "Wade," he corrected with a grin. "If we're going to keep talking up here like a pair of rooftop philosophers, we might as well drop the formality." "Are we going to keep talking on rooftops?" she asked dryly. "That depends," he said, "on whether you keep building up here without anyone around to help." Josie sighed and set the hammer down with a soft clink, turning toward him as best she could. The angle made the swell of her belly unmistakable. Wade felt his chest tighten with something that wasn't just concern. It was instinct. The kind of instinct that made a man want to guard something fiercely, even if it wasn't his to guard. "Wade," she said slowly. "I know this probably seems..." She paused, chewing on the word. "Unconventional. But I didn't stumble into this life by accident. I chose it, and I can damn well handle what comes with it." "I don't doubt that for a second," Wade said, quiet but firm. "But just because you can go it alone doesn't mean you have to. Sometimes alone is safer." The words slipped out too fast, and when they did, her face changed. Wade saw it plain as daylight. Something old and hurting. Something she hadn't meant to show. "Safer than what?" he asked gently. Her expression shut down like a door slammed in a windstorm. Whatever had been open in her a moment ago was gone now, locked behind hard eyes and a set jaw. "Safer than depending on people who give out help like it's a favor you'll owe forever." Wade knew that kind of speech. He'd heard it from folks who'd been burned, who'd been made to feel small for needing anything at all. This wasn't pride talking. This was survival. And it told him more about Josie McGraw than any confession ever could. Wade had seen that look before. In wild horses that had been beaten too many times, in ranch hands who learned the hard way that trust could cost you more than silence. What if someone helped without expecting anything back? He asked gently. Josie didn't hesitate. "There's always a price," she muttered. She reached for the hammer again, her movements sharp, like she was nailing down more than just wood, like she was trying to hold herself together with every swing. "Kindness costs," she said. "Sometimes you can see it coming. Sometimes it's tucked behind a smile. But the bill always shows up." Wade's voice came before his better judgment could stop it. Who hurt you? Too blunt, too close. The kind of question that didn't belong between two people still learning each other's silences. Josie froze. Her face went pale, and for a second, he thought she might drop the hammer. That, she said quietly, voice calm but her fingers trembling, is absolutely none of your business. Wade gave a slow nod. He'd crossed a line. Every nerve in his body wanted to ask more, wanted to dig through her armor and figure out what haunted her. But he backed off. You're right, he said. I'm sorry. Shouldn't have asked. She studied him then, really looked at him, as if trying to decide whether to believe his apology. Then, to his surprise, she gave a small nod. Thank you. They worked in silence after that, and strangely, it wasn't awkward, just quiet, steady. Wade handed up shingles, passed nails when she needed them, and watched as Josie measured and hammered with practiced ease. Her cuts were clean, her hands sure, her eyes sharp. This wasn't a woman pretending at self-reliance. She knew what she was doing, down to the grain. By the time they climbed down, the sun was high enough to press the heat into their backs. Josie tugged off her hat and wiped sweat from her brow, leaving behind a streak of sawdust that made her look younger, softer. Like the woman beneath all that grit still had some gentleness left. Thank you, she said. And there was something stiff in her voice, like admitting she needed help took more effort than the work itself. It went quicker with another set of hands. You're welcome. And Josie? Wade waited until she looked him in the eye. For what it's worth, I think what you're doing out here is something rare. He nodded toward the half-built cabin. Not just that, the whole thing. Starting over like this, that takes guts. A flush rose on her cheeks, and for a heartbeat, her guard slipped. Beneath it, Wade saw a woman carrying more than just timber, carrying loss and pride and something like hope she didn't dare name. Some folks might call it foolishness, she said, smiling faintly. Then some folks don't know a damn thing. Josie let out a real laugh. It burst out bright, surprised, and it hit Wade like spring wind through a canyon. That sound, light and unguarded, cracked something in him wide open. She looked different when she laughed, like someone who hadn't always been braced for a fight. I should let you get back to your ranch, she said. But the reluctance in her voice mirrored the one sitting in his chest. The Morrison bull'll still be there tomorrow, Wade said, dragging out the moment, slipping on his gloves slowly. Josie, I meant what I said earlier. About offering help. Not because I think you can't handle things, but because neighbors ought to look out for one another. She raised an eyebrow. We're hardly neighbors. Your ranch is 10 miles off. Wade grinned. In Boston, sure, that's a journey. But out here, 10 miles makes us practically kin. Her smile faded a notch. That word, family, changed the air between them. I keep my family small, she said quietly. Wade didn't press. He just gave a respectful nod. Fair enough. If you ever change your mind about taking help from a neighborly sort, Wade said as he swung into the saddle, you know where to find me. He tipped his hat, then nudged his horse into motion. But even as he rode away, Wade's mind stayed behind, back in that clearing, with the woman who swung a hammer like it was part of her soul. She'd gotten to him in a way he couldn't put words to. And no matter how he tried to reason himself out of it, he knew he'd be back. The silver watch tucked into his vest ticked quietly against his ribs, keeping time like a metronome for a future that no longer seemed so certain. For most of his life, the road ahead had been paved. marry a respectable woman, raise a family to carry on the Calder name, take over from his father one responsibility at a time. But now, that path felt more like a prison. Somewhere 10 miles south, a pregnant woman was forging her own way, with nothing but an axe, a pair of boots, and enough grit to shame a cavalry unit. And she was breaking his heart. One quiet act of defiance at a time. The leather gloves Josie pulled on each morning used to belong to her father. Even 3 years after Oric McGraw passed, they still smelled faintly of pipe smoke and pine shavings, scents that wrapped around her childhood like a flannel blanket. She wore them like armor now. The creased leather fit her fingers like memory itself, guiding each motion through another punishing day of labor. But today, the gloves felt wrong. Too snug across the knuckles, more like a burden than a shield. Then again, everything felt off. The baby had dropped in the last week, settling low and heavy in her belly. Every move felt slower, tighter. Bending to lift a board lit up her spine like fire, and climbing the ladder to reach the roof left her winded before she reached the top rung. Josie stood in the clearing, eyes scanning the structure that was slowly turning from cabin to home. The log walls stood firm now. The roof was shingled. Just yesterday, she'd hung the thick wooden door she'd shaped with her own hands over 3 long days. 2 small windows flanked the entry, glass panes she'd carefully hauled all the way from Willowbrook in a hired wagon she could barely afford. Inside, the stone hearth waited for winter. The chimney finally drew clean after days of fiddling that left her sooty, sore, and swearing like she'd never set foot in a finishing school. But today she faced her biggest chore yet, chopping enough firewood to survive the brutal Montana cold. The log pile she'd cut and hauled from the tree line stared back at her like a dare. A mountain of work, daring her to blink. She gripped the splitting maul. Its weight was second nature now. The first swings were clean, cracking the logs in 2 with sharp satisfaction that echoed across the prairie like rifle shots. But the higher the sun climbed, the more she paused, breath coming shorter, her lower back screaming louder. That's when she heard it. Hooves. Josie looked up, already guessing who it was. Sure enough, Wade Calder rode into her clearing, reins slack, posture easy. His visits had become a pattern, always showing up just when the work turned hardest, always polite, always offering help she never accepted. What caught her off guard wasn't the sight of him. It was the way her chest lifted, uninvited. Damn it. "Morning, Josie," he called out, dismounting with that effortless grace that made her scowl in spite of herself. "Splitting firewood today, huh?" She raised a brow, voice dry. "Even for a man, that's hard work, or so I've been told." "Yeah," Wade said, grinning. "I believe you've reminded me of that before." He didn't flinch at her tone. In fact, he looked almost pleased. "I was going to say, even with proper help, it'd be hard," Wade said, flashing that easy grin. "But your version works just fine." Josie set down the maul, brushing sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. She was keenly aware of how she must look, hair falling loose from its braid, her dress soaked through with sweat, cheeks flushed and streaked with dust. Not long ago, the idea of any man seeing her like this would have turned her inside out with shame. But now, appearances mattered less than the way Wade Calder looked at her. Not with pity, but something dangerously close to admiration. "Let me guess," she said flatly. "You just happened to be riding by. Figured you'd check in on the poor, helpless woman." "Actually," he said, reaching into his saddlebag, "I brought you something." He pulled out a bundle wrapped in brown paper, holding it out like an offering. "My ma insisted I deliver it myself." Josie raised a wary brow. Your mother doesn't even know me. She knows you're a pregnant woman living out here on your own, Wade replied. And that's enough for Martha Calder to decide you fall under her care. He extended the package. She sent some baby clothes she knitted and a little herbal tea. Her own mix helps with the queasiness. She also told me to invite you for Sunday supper, he added, half smiling. Though I warned her you'd likely say no. The mention of his family knowing about her sent a cold twinge through Josie, despite the rising heat of the day. She'd fought hard to stay invisible. No questions, no opinions, no one poking their nose in where it didn't belong. You told your family about me? She asked quietly. Wade's smile faded, his tone softening. Just that a neighbor woman was out here homesteading alone, that you might welcome a little support. Ma's got a soft spot for women going through hard times. And what exactly did you tell them about my circumstances? Nothing, he said simply. Because I don't know a damn thing about them. All I know is what I see. Josie studied his face. She looked for any flicker of deceit or hidden intent. But like always, she saw only steady honesty. And still, the idea of being talked about, even kindly, made her gut twist with old dread. I appreciate the gesture, she said, her voice clipped. But I'm not looking for charity. It ain't charity, Wade replied. It's called being neighborly. There's a difference. Is there? Her voice sharpened. 'Cause where I come from, folks don't offer help without expecting something back. Wade fell quiet, watching her. His dark eyes searching her like he was trying to see beneath the tough skin she wore like armor. What happened to you, Josie? He asked, voice low. What made you so scared of kindness? The question hit its mark. She didn't answer. Not right away, but memories stirred like ghosts rising. Everett Langston's lies, cloaked in promises, whispering devotion while sleeping with the secretary. Her father's old partner, who offered to manage her inheritance after Oric McGraw passed, only to drain it behind her back. And her own mother, who wrapped every kind word in strings that pulled tighter with every favor owed. I'm not scared, Josie said at last. I'm just practical. I've learned independence don't come cheap, but it's a hell of a lot safer than owing someone. Her voice hardened. And if loneliness is the price for peace of mind, then so be it. Wade exhaled, slow and rough. His face was a mix of frustration and sorrow. That's not living, he said. That's just surviving. Survival is enough for me right now. And when the baby comes, he asked, when the snow traps you in here for weeks, when something goes wrong and there's no one to help? Each question struck like a hammer, forcing her to feel what she'd fought so hard to ignore. Josie had prepared for the practical side of winter, stockpiled food, chopped firewood, stitched thick quilts. But the truth of being snowed in for months with a newborn, alone in a cabin that echoed with silence. That was a thought she kept shoving into the dark. I'll manage, she said flatly, the words sounding thinner than air. You don't have to manage alone. Wade's voice was low, gentle, and that nearly shattered her resolve. She turned away, pretending to check the unsplit logs, but really just trying to hide the sudden sting behind her eyes. What are you suggesting, Wade? That I let myself become your family's little act of charity? That I accept help I'll never be able to return and spend the rest of my life feeling like I owe something to folks who don't owe me a damn thing? I'm saying, maybe it's time you let yourself trust someone again, he answered. Not everyone's got a hidden angle. Some of us—" His voice faltered, then steadied. "Some of us learn the hard way what it costs to stop trusting." She hadn't meant to sound so sharp, but the bitterness came out like a reflex. She couldn't help it. Those walls she'd built were the only reason she was still standing. But then she looked at him, and in Wade Calder's face, Josie saw not pity or offense, but something deeper. Something like shared hurt, like he knew what it meant to keep people at arm's length because it was safer that way. And somehow, that made her chest ache. "Josie," he said softly, "I'm not asking for your secrets. I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking to help you split some firewood." That offer, plain, honest, without any strings, broke through everything. No lectures, no pity, just help, right here and now. Her head dipped before she could stop it. "All right," she murmured, "but just the firewood." His smile came slow and warm, like sunrise after a long, cold night. Just the firewood. They got to work. No more talking, just the steady rhythm of labor, the thud of wood splitting, and the soft scrape of Josie stacking each log. Wade handled the maul like he'd been born with it in hand, sure and practiced. And whether she liked it or not, Josie found herself quietly impressed. Turned out the rich rancher's son wasn't all talk. "You're better at this than I figured," she admitted as they paused to drink from the water bucket. He chuckled. "Did you think I spent my day sipping brandy and brushing horses in the parlor?" Something like that. Wade laughed again, wiping sweat from his brow with his sleeve. "My old man, Silas Calder, believes every man ought to know the land before he claims to run it. So we all start from the bottom. Mucking stalls, patching fence lines, pulling calves in the dead of winter." "He sounds like a smart man," she said. "He's also stubborn as a mule, dead sure he's right about everything within 50 miles. Wade's grin dimmed just a little, revealing something else beneath. Josie tilted her head. "Let me guess, he's got plans for your future?" "He's got my whole life drawn up like a campaign map," Wade muttered. "Marry Clarabelle Vane by spring, take over the breeding stock, start producing the next line of Calder heirs, right on schedule." That hit her harder than it should have. She had no claim on Wade Calder. Hell, she hadn't even wanted one. And yet, something twisted in her gut at the word marriage. "Clarabelle Vane sounds like a good match," she said, keeping her tone even. "I assume she's from a proper family?" "The best," he said, flat as dust. "Her father owns the biggest ranch in the county," Wade said, splitting another log clean in two. "She went to finishing schools back east, can host a dinner for 20 without breaking a sweat, plays piano like she was born to it, and can quote Shakespeare till your ears fall off." He paused, leaning on the handle of the maul. "But Clarabelle Vane's never once swung an axe, never mucked a stall, never stayed up through the night with a sick calf. She sees a ranch as a business ledger, not a life lived." Josie didn't look up. "There's nothing wrong with treating ranching like a business." "No, there ain't," Wade agreed. "But there's something wrong with marrying someone just 'cause they check the boxes on some list, rather than because you can't imagine drawing breath without 'em." The weight of those words hung between them like dust before a storm. Josie's pulse stuttered. She turned back to the stack of wood, keeping her hands moving, trying to steady her thoughts with rhythm. "Practical marriages tend to last," she said at last. Love's unreliable. Spoken like someone who's been burned." His voice was quiet now, spoken like someone who's learned the difference between fantasy and living truth. Wade picked up the maul again. What if they don't have to be different things? Then you're more hopeful than I am. He didn't argue, just swung the maul again, harder this time. Maybe. Or maybe I just haven't given up believing there's better than settling. They finished the woodpile without much more said, just the thud of splitting wood and the scrape of logs stacking into place. By the time they were done, Josie stood back and looked at the pile with a sense of quiet pride. Each row was more than firewood. It was survival, preparedness. One more step toward living life on her own terms. Another task done, another day endured. She should have felt accomplished. So why did the thought of Wade leaving hit her like a cold wind across the prairie? "Thank you," she said, the words coming easier than expected. "I wouldn't have finished without you." "You would have managed," he replied. "Just might have worn yourself out doing it. Still, I'm grateful." He nodded, brushing off his gloves and reaching for his hat. As he moved toward his horse, he paused, his expression careful. "Josie, that Sunday dinner I mentioned? Offer still stands. My Martha, she'd be real glad to meet you, and you'd be welcome, no strings." Her stomach knotted. The thought of sitting at someone's table, answering questions, pretending to belong, it made her want to run. "I don't think that's wise." "Why not?" She opened her mouth, but the truth caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain the walls she'd built, why they kept her safe. "I'm not sure I remember how to be around people anymore. I don't want to talk about my past. I don't want folks telling me what I should or shouldn't do. And you're scared you might like us." His voice was quiet, but it hit home, clean as a bullet. "Maybe." Wade mounted up but didn't grab the reins. "For what it's worth, I think you'd fit in better than you believe. My she's got her opinions, sure, but she's got a knack for seeing folks for who they really are." Josie hesitated. "I'll think about it." They both knew that was a lie, but Wade just nodded, accepting it without pressure. He tipped his hat, then turned his horse and rode off, leaving Josie standing in the silence beside a neatly stacked pile of firewood. Her father's gloves still wrapped around her hands, and her heart beating far too fast for a woman who was supposed to be alone. That night, Josie McGraw sat quietly by the hearth she'd built with her own hands, her unborn child stirring restlessly beneath her ribs. In her lap lay the parcel Wade Calder had delivered, sent by his mother. She peeled back the paper to reveal soft, yellow baby clothes, hand-knitted with practical care and no hint of vanity. Between the tiny garments was a folded note, written in a neat, womanly script. "Dear Miss McGraw, please know you've got friends nearby, even if we haven't met yet. These were knit with hope for your child's health and happiness. The tea is an old family remedy that helped me through 4 births. Steep it strong, add honey to taste." Warmly, Martha Calder Josie brought one of the knitted sleeves to her cheek. For the first time in weeks, tears gathered. Such quiet kindness, offered freely, no strings, no judgment. Maybe Wade was right. Maybe not everyone who reached out came with expectations or hidden motives. But as she gently rewrapped the bundle and placed it back in its box, she reminded herself that wanting to believe in selfless goodness wasn't the same as trusting it. That kind of trust had cost her dearly once. She wasn't about to forget that lesson now, no matter how much her tired heart yearned for connection. The kitchen table was covered in quilt squares, bits of memory stitched into hope. faded blue from her father's favorite work shirt, a cream cotton scrap from a dress she'd outgrown in more ways than one, a patch of soft brown wool from a shawl that had belonged to her grandmother. Together, they would become a blanket for the baby, a quilt built from remnants of the past, warmed by love, crafted by her own hand. Her fingers traced the edge of the pattern where the border was still unfinished. The stitches were small and even, evidence of long hours under lamplight. Quilting had been one of the rare domestic arts she truly loved back in her well-groomed former life. The rhythm of the needle gave her peace, something steady when her thoughts refused to be still. And lately, those thoughts circled more often than not around one man, the rancher with storm-dark hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. Wade Calder had a way of brushing past every wall she put up. Every time she swore she was done letting people in, the baby kicked again, sharp and insistent, reacting to her tension. Josie sucked in a breath and placed a palm gently over the movement. 6 months now. She couldn't hide her shape much longer, no matter how loose the dress is. Sooner than later, she'd have to face decisions, practical ones. Midwife, birthing supplies, a plan for when the time came. At first, the isolation of her Montana cabin had been a sanctuary. But now, with winter pressing in and no help nearby, it felt fragile. What if something went wrong? What if the baby came early, during a snowstorm? What if she died giving birth, and her child was left alone in this cabin, miles from anyone? Josie clenched her jaw and pushed the thoughts away. Women had been bringing children into this world without doctors for centuries. She was strong. She was healthy. She was prepared. That would have to be enough. A knock pulled her from the spiral. She glanced up, startled. Late afternoon, not a usual time for visitors, and she hadn't been expecting anyone. Wade's visits had become more regular, but he had a pattern. Morning hours, usually when she was knee-deep in the toughest chores. This wasn't him. She opened the door slowly. Standing there was a woman maybe 10 years older, with streaks of gray in her chestnut hair and warm, perceptive eyes that seemed to take in everything without saying a word. Her coat and boots were plain, but of fine quality. Clearly someone from means. But it wasn't wealth Josie noticed first. It was kindness. And it cut through the cold like sun through cloud. She wore a well-made wool dress, solid leather boots, and a finely tailored cloak. Not the kind stitched in haste, but something chosen with care. "Miss McGraw, I'm Martha Calder," the woman said, her voice carrying both confidence and kindness. "Hope you don't mind the intrusion. I was over visiting the Dobbs family and thought I'd stop by to introduce myself properly." Josie's first instinct was to keep the door half closed and retreat back into the safe quiet of her home. But there was something disarming in Martha Calder's face. A mix of warmth and respect that didn't demand anything, just offered. "Mrs. Calder, this is unexpected. I imagine it is. Wade mentioned you valued your privacy. Still, I wanted to thank you in person for the note you sent with the tea." Josie blinked, uncertain. "I didn't send any note." Martha's smile deepened, not smug, but understanding. "Maybe not in words, but you kept the baby clothes, used the tea. A woman who didn't want kindness would have returned the package unopened." There was no accusation in the words, just quiet observation, and it left Josie oddly disarmed. Before she knew it, she'd stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Please, come in. I was just doing some sewing." Martha walked in with the poised ease of a woman used to being welcomed anywhere. But there was no judgment in her eyes. None of that social measuring Josie had come to expect from women of wealth. Instead, her gaze traveled over the stone hearth, the hand-cut furniture, the plain but neatly kept space. "What a lovely home you've made," she said. And Josie heard genuine admiration. "Wade told me you built it yourself. I had to see it to believe it. The workmanship. It's remarkable." "Thank you," Josie said, clearing her throat. "It's nothing fancy, but it does the job. Fancy's overrated. What matters is solid and comfortable." Her eyes shifted to the quilt squares laid out on the table. "Oh my, may I?" Josie nodded, wary as Martha leaned in, inspecting the stitching with an appreciative eye. She'd been prepared for judgment, from someone richer, someone who might see her struggle as something shameful. But Martha only spoke gently. "Your needlework is beautiful, and the way you matched these fabrics, it's more than craftsmanship, it's heart. This'll be a family keepsake." "It's just to keep my hands busy," Josie muttered, though her throat tightened. Martha shook her head. "No, this is a love letter, written in thread. Every mother understands that language. That simple recognition of her motherhood, of her care, without judgment, without question, struck deep." Josie hadn't cried in months, but now the tears burned behind her eyes. "Would you like some tea?" she asked quickly, needing something to do before emotion took over. "I'd love some." As Josie steeped the herbs, Martha's own blend, which had eased her morning sickness, she found herself watching the older woman. There was nothing put on about her presence. She didn't gush over the cabin's modesty, didn't condescend. She simply belonged, like someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. "How long have you lived in Montana?" Josie asked as she poured the tea into the 2 best cups she had. 28 years, Martha answered. "Came here as a bride from Chicago. Thought I was making the worst mistake of my life." Martha chuckled, eyes distant with memory. "The ranch back then? Just a whisper of what it is now. We had a couple hundred head of cattle, one leaky cabin that groaned every time the rain hit, and a husband who worked 18-hour days just so we wouldn't go hungry." "That must have been hard," Josie said. "Terrifying," Martha replied, laughing softly. "I was raised to ring bells for servants and plan dinner menus, not cook beans over a campfire or pull calves out in the dark." She gave a wry smile. "That first winter, I cried myself to sleep nearly every night. Thought I'd thrown away my whole life, marrying below my station, leaving the city behind." Josie sat across from her, warming her fingers around the teacup. "What changed?" "I did," Martha said simply. "Bit by bit, I came to see there was a deep satisfaction in building something real instead of polishing something false. The ranch, it stopped being just his dream. It became ours." She turned her gaze toward the window, where the land stretched out in quiet majesty. And the land, it gets in your blood after a while. Teaches you what freedom really feels like. "You never regretted leaving Chicago?" "Oh, I had my moments," she admitted. "Usually in the middle of a blizzard, or when one of the little ones had a fever and the nearest doctor was 2 days away. But no, not regret. This life gave me something I never found in any drawing room or chandelier-lit parlor: purpose." Josie drank in her words with slow sips of tea. Martha Calder hadn't just survived. She had chosen this life, and she had a partner. Josie had made the same choice, but she faced the road alone. "Wade told me you studied back east," Martha said gently. "Boston, wasn't it?" Josie stiffened. She braced herself for the questions, the judgment she'd come to expect any time her past surfaced. "Yes, though it feels like another lifetime." "I imagine it does. Leaving behind everything you knew, that takes real grit, especially under—" Martha paused, her tone softening. "Challenging circumstances." "You mean being pregnant and unmarried?" "I mean being alone," Martha said calmly. "When it's clear you were never meant to be." The shift in tone caught Josie off guard. She was used to side eyes, whispers, lectures. But here was a woman who saw her, really saw her, and didn't flinch. "People think all sorts of things about women like me." "People think all sorts of things about everything," Martha said with a shrug. "The question is, are you going to live by their rules or yours?" "That's easy to say when you've got respectability and a husband to shield you." Martha set her cup down, and when she looked at Josie, her gaze was calm, steady, unshakable. "My dear, I've been married for 28 years to a man who thinks women should be cherished, not challenged. We've built one of the strongest ranches in this state. Folks know my name, respect it. And I'm telling you, what you're doing, carving out a life from nothing but willpower and love, that's braver than anything I've ever done." The words landed hard, not with cruelty, but with the heavy truth Josie hadn't let herself hope for. She'd needed someone to say it, just once. "I don't feel brave," she whispered. "Most days I feel like I'm hanging on by a thread, that I'm making one mistake after another." "That is courage," Martha said quietly. "It's not about being fearless. It's about walking through the fear anyway." Josie blinked back tears. For the second time since Martha stepped through the door, something inside her cracked. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You don't even know me." "I know enough," Martha said softly. "Enough to see a woman who's walked away from everything she knew, who's hammering her own roof and laying a future down with her own 2 hands, while carrying a child under her heart." She glanced toward the fire, her eyes catching the light with quiet warmth. "I know my boy comes back from here with a look I haven't seen on his face since he was a wild-hearted kid, chasing mustangs across the flats. And I know the look you wear, strong on the outside, but holding something fragile underneath. I used to wear that same expression once." Josie felt her breath catch. "Wade's been kind, but I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. There's nothing improper going on between us," she said quickly, voice tight with embarrassment. "Improper?" Martha let out a hearty laugh that bounced off the cabin walls like sunlight. "Honey, recognizing something good in another person ain't improper. What would be improper is pretending it doesn't exist just to satisfy someone else's idea of decency." Josie flushed. "Mrs. Calder, I'm not looking for complications. I've got a baby on the way, and survival's enough of a full-time job." "Of course it is," Martha agreed gently, "but survival doesn't mean you have to shut the door on kindness or companionship just because someone once taught you not to trust it." The way she said it, so casually, like pain was something familiar, made Josie's spine stiffen. "So Wade told you," she said, eyes narrowing. "He told me nothing more than that you're out here on your own. I didn't need more. A woman doesn't end up living like this without someone breaking her trust first and deep." Josie stared down at her tea, her fingers tightening around the cup. Something in Martha's voice, calm, steady, undemanding, made her want to spill everything she'd buried so deep. But the habit of hiding, of bracing for judgment, ran too deep. "Some wounds don't heal right," she said at last. "They scar over, and the pain just changes shape." Martha nodded. "That's what scars are. Proof you survived." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The golden light of late afternoon spilled across the rough wooden floor, and Josie felt something inside her begin to ease, a knot loosening, just a little, in Martha's presence. "Mrs. Calder, can I ask you something?" "Martha," she corrected with a smile. "And of course. When you first came out here, did you ever wonder if you'd made a mistake, even after you got used to the life?" Martha leaned back, thoughtful. "Oh, sure. Any woman who's made a big leap has moments of doubt. That's natural. But I came to understand the difference between fear and wisdom. Fear will whisper for you to run back to what's familiar, even if it was never really safe. Wisdom asks harder questions, makes you check your compass. And how do you tell which one's speaking? Fear makes you smaller. Wisdom stretches you." Josie sat with that for a moment, staring into the steam curling off her tea. Had she come here chasing something better? Or just trying to outrun what broke her? Was her grit real, or was it just armor? Martha rose, her hand brushing down her skirts as if reluctant to leave. "I should let you settle in for the evening. But before I go, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You've got friends in these parts, whether you believe it or not. If you need anything, supplies, help, or just a cup of tea and some quiet company, you know where to find me." "Thank you," Josie whispered. "That means more than you know." Martha reached the door, then turned back, her hand resting on the frame. "One last thing, if you'll let me give it." Josie nodded, wary but willing. "Don't let the ones who hurt you decide how you treat the ones who don't. Don't turn your back on something good just because someone else ruined it first." Before Josie could get a word in, Martha was already gone. Just the faint trace of her perfume hanging in the air, and words that wouldn't stop ringing through the silence that followed. That night, as Josie sat by the soft glow of her oil lamp, quilting in rhythm with her thoughts, she found herself circling back to that conversation, stirred in ways that both soothed and unsettled her. Martha Calder had brought with her a kind of motherly warmth Josie hadn't realized she missed so deeply. But more than that, she challenged beliefs Josie had wrapped around herself like armor. Maybe this hard-won independence of hers wasn't pure strength. Maybe, just maybe, it had become a cage she mistook for safety. Could accepting help make her braver, not weaker? The baby shifted under her ribs. A sharp, undeniable reminder that soon, every decision would shape more than just her own life. Did she really want to raise this child in absolute solitude? Or was there a way to build something with people, without losing herself? Her hands moved slowly across the fabric, stitch by stitch. Wade's visits drifted into her thoughts, now colored by a clarity she'd avoided. She'd been so busy guarding her heart, she'd missed what was quietly forming between them. Not the kind of hunger she'd come to expect and fear from men, but something gentler and far more dangerous. The truth hit her like a jolt. She was falling for Wade Calder. Not in some daydream way, but bone-deep, heart-in-hand falling. And the terrifying part? She knew it could break them both. Her fingers trembled as she set down the quilt and braced for another night without sleep. The bent horseshoe had been lying in the brush behind the cabin for weeks, rusted, nearly buried in leaves. forgotten by whatever passing beast had cast it off. Most folks would have seen junk. Josie saw something else entirely. That afternoon, with nothing but a makeshift forge of river stones and grit, she'd heated and hammered it back into shape. When she was done, it wasn't just scrap metal anymore. It was a door handle, smoothed and curved, warm in the hand. She studied it with a kind of quiet pride. A broken thing, given new life through fire and patience. It felt like a message. If only hearts were as easy to reshape. The wind carried the edge of winter across the porch, snapping her shawl against her arms. November in Montana wasn't like back east. In Boston, it meant the start of glittering soirees, polite laughter, and the cruel pageantry of social ambition. Out here, November meant something far more primal. Survival. Her food stores were full, the woodpile stacked high, and her cabin held up well. But watching the clouds bunch and roll over the distant peaks, Josie couldn't shake the feeling that what she was bracing for wasn't just snow. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, fast and hard. She turned and saw Wade tearing across the field, not with his usual ease, but driven by something urgent. The tension in his shoulders had her chest tightening even before he reached her. He yanked the reins with more force than usual and swung down before the horse had fully stopped, boots hitting the ground with a thud. His face was flushed, not just from the cold, but from something fierce beneath it. "Josie, thank God," he breathed. "When I saw the smoke, I thought—" He cut himself off, eyes sweeping her from head to toe, clearly seeing no injury, no danger. Just her, safe, whole, and staring back at him with wide eyes and a heart now galloping to match his horse. "The smoke from your chimney didn't sit right?" Wade said, breath still sharp from the ride. "Too thick. Looked off from the ridge." "I was banking the fire for the night," Josie replied, watching the tension coiled in his posture. "Wade, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost." He gave a bitter half-smile. "A father. Though sometimes I wonder if there's much of a difference." She blinked, startled. Wade had always spoken of Silas Calder with dutiful, if distant, respect. This sudden shift in tone sent up every warning flag in her mind. "Did something happen at the ranch?" "You could say that." He began pacing across the porch, boots grinding into the worn planks, his strides tight with restrained fury. "My old man had a visitor today, Thaddeus Vane, come by to talk wedding details." Josie stiffened. The name hit like a thrown stone. She'd known Wade was expected to marry Clarabelle Vane, told herself it was for the best. Still, hearing it confirmed this way made something twist sharp in her chest. "Well, I guess that's good news, isn't it? I mean, you always knew this was the plan." Wade stopped dead, turning to face her. His dark eyes sparked. "Expected? Yeah. Agreed to? Never. And apparently that doesn't matter a damn. Seems my opinion's just noise. Surely Silas wouldn't force you into something you didn't want," she said quietly. Wade's laugh came dry and humorless. "Wouldn't he? He already gave his word. Said the engagement'll be announced at Christmas. Wedding set for April, right after the spring roundup. My future's been drawn and inked, and no one bothered to ask if I even wanted it." Josie eased down into the porch chair she'd built herself, her legs suddenly unsure. "What did you tell him?" "That I'm not ready, that I've got responsibilities to tend to first." He looked straight at her, unwavering. He asked me what could possibly matter more than securing the family's future. I told him I'd made a promise to help a neighbor through the winter. Her breath caught. Wade, you can't use me to stall your engagement. That's not fair to Clarabelle or to yourself. I'm not using you, he said, stepping closer. I'm telling the truth. His voice had dropped, steady and low, these past few months, coming here, talking with you, watching you build something from nothing. Hell, Josie, it showed me what I'd been missing all this time. And what's that? She asked, though her voice barely carried. Purpose, meaning, something real, not just carrying out someone else's plans because it's what's expected. Her heart pounded so loud she felt it in her ears, but she held herself together with force of will. Those feelings, they'll fade. Marriage and family give their own kind of meaning, Wade. Clarabelle would make a good wife, she added. Wouldn't she? A suitable wife, he corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Her voice tightened. Most marriages that last are built on compatibility and mutual goals, not... She hesitated. Not some fantasy of romance. Is that what you had? He asked softly. You and Auric, compatibility and shared goals? The question slammed through her guard before she could brace for it. Josie felt her chest constrict, the old ache stirring like it always did when the past came calling. I thought I did, she said, barely above a whisper. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. What happened, Josie? Wade's voice gentled. What scared you off love so bad you'd rather live out here alone than ever risk it again? His tone wasn't prying. It was steady, warm, patient, but it scraped too close to truths she'd buried deep. Truths that had cost her too much already. And no matter how kind his voice, she knew better than to let them rise. Truth, after all, was a luxury she couldn't afford. Especially now. Not with a man who reminded her too much of everything she'd fought so hard to leave behind. My past has no place in this, Wade, Josie said flatly. You've got a real chance at a good life with a woman from your world. Don't ruin that chasing some foolish notion about us. Wade's voice dropped low, tight like a coiled spring. A notion, huh? Josie, what do you think's been happening here these past few months? I think a kind man helped his neighbor. Nothing more. Nothing more? Wade echoed, the words leaving his mouth like bitter ash. Is that really what you believe? She forced herself to hold his gaze, though it felt like staring into the sun. It's what I have to believe. Why? Because anything else would be foolish. It'd tear us both apart. For a long moment, he just looked at her. So deeply it made her want to retreat into the cabin and lock the door behind her. When he finally spoke, there wasn't anger in his voice, but something quieter. Something that rattled her more. Someone broke you good, didn't they? Taught you caring's a trap, that love's a danger. Someone taught me, she whispered, that feelings and reality don't always mix. And what if they can? He said gently. What if there's a way for us to be together without losing what matters? There isn't, she said quickly, rising to her feet, needing space, air, between them. Wade, you're the son of a ranching family. You've got duty, reputation, people watching your every move. I'm a pregnant woman with no name and too much baggage. There's no version of life where the two of us get to have peace. What if I don't give a damn about reputation? Then you're more naive than I thought. She snapped before she could stop herself, her voice a whip meant to push him away. Wade jerked as if she'd slapped him. The regret hit her instantly, a wave crashing before the damage even settled. "I'm sorry," she said, quick and soft. "That was cruel. You're not naive. You're just idealistic." But idealism doesn't last long out here. The world tears it up and spits it out. "So that's what this is to you?" he asked. "Just some starry-eyed dream?" "I think," she said slowly, "you're trying to paint something beautiful out of a situation that doesn't have a happy ending." She swallowed hard. "Your father's right to push for Clarabelle. That marriage makes sense. For your future. For your name." "And what about your future?" "My future is doing right by this child. Building something on my own. Alone." "You don't have to be alone." The quiet force in his voice nearly undid her. And God help her, it was tempting to believe in a world where love could beat back every cold fact and hard truth, where hope was enough. But she'd walked that road once, and it had left her bleeding. "Yes, I do," she said, firm now. "And you need to accept that, Wade. For both our sakes." "I can't," he said, voice shaking now. "Not when I know you feel something too. What I feel doesn't matter. It's the only thing that does." Josie turned away, hands gripping the railing, knuckles white as bone. Her whole body trembled, trying to hold steady. "Go home, Wade," she said at last. "Marry Clarabelle Vane, build the life they want for you, and leave me to mine. Forget about me." "Is that really what you want?" Wade asked. Her heart screamed no. What Josie truly wanted was to cast aside every fear and believe. Believe that love could weather any storm, that Wade Calder's feelings weren't some fleeting kindness, but something rooted. Something real. She wanted to stop being afraid of wanting, of needing. But what she wanted and what was wise, those were two different paths. "It's what needs to happen," she said instead. Wade didn't say a word for a long time, long enough that she turned, unsure if he'd even stayed. His eyes were no longer burning with frustration. Now they just looked tired, worn, almost like he'd already lost. "You know the part that guts me the most?" he finally said. "I think I could have changed your mind, if I'd had the time." He swallowed hard. "Because underneath all that armor you wear like a second skin, I see a woman who wants to love and be loved just as fiercely as I do. Wade, but you're not going to give me that time." He cut in gently. "You're so scared of being hurt again, you'd rather burn this bridge first. Wound us both, just so you're the one holding the knife." The truth in his words stung sharper than anger ever could. Josie felt stripped bare, like he'd seen straight through every wall she'd built just to stay upright. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" he asked. "You've already made up your mind that anyone who dares love you is either a liar or temporary or bound to walk away. So you get your rejection in first." He exhaled slowly. "It's self-defense, just dressed up like wisdom." "And what if you're wrong?" she asked, her voice small. "What if trusting you would be the worst mistake I ever made?" "Then at least," Wade said, stepping back toward his horse, "you'd have lived enough to regret it." He swung into the saddle with the kind of grace that made it look easy. But before he turned to ride, he looked down at her again, eyes soft with grief and something else. Maybe pity. "Josie, I hope one day you find the courage to let someone love you right. You deserve that, even if you can't see it." She swallowed the lump rising in her throat. "And I hope you find happiness with Clarabelle Vane." The words sliced her as they came out, like speaking them carved something vital from her chest. "No," Wade said, voice quiet but certain. "You don't. If you did, you wouldn't look like your heart's breaking when you said it." Before she could respond, he was gone, his silhouette fading into dusk, hoofbeats growing fainter until they vanished into silence. Josie stayed on the porch long after, her breath misting in the cold air as the first snowflakes of winter drifted down. The sky was dim, the world still. And somewhere inside her, something felt like it had been lost for good. Inside, the reshaped horseshoe caught the firelight. It glinted with a promise, one that now felt distant. Some things, Josie reminded herself, couldn't be reforged, no matter how much heat or pressure you applied. Some breaks ran too deep. The baby stirred beneath her ribs, restless with the storm in her chest. She placed both hands gently over her belly, offering what calm she could muster. "It's just you and me," she whispered. "Always has been." But even as she said it, the ache in her voice betrayed her. Deep down, Josie McGraw knew she may have just turned her back on something rare and made the worst mistake of her life. The cradle had taken her 3 weeks to build. Every curve, every joint carved with quiet care, the kind born from solitude and a desperate need to make something beautiful for the little life growing inside her. Golden pine, hand-picked from the woods. It rocked smoothly, just like her father's old chair back in Boston. Now, with December snow curling against the windows, Josie ran her fingers along the finished wood. The cradle was ready, but she wasn't sure she was. The cradle symbolized hope, but also the weight of reality. Soon, she'd be a mother, and she'd face it all alone. The solitude that once felt like a hard-won freedom now pressed down on Josie McGraw like the weight of a storm. It had been 3 weeks since Wade Calder last rode up to her cabin. 3 weeks since their bitter farewell on the porch. She kept telling herself it was for the best. Clean breaks hurt less in the long run. Better to cut the thread before it knotted too tight. But the quiet had grown heavier than the snowfall building up against her door. Josie sat near the fire, rocking gently in her chair, working a baby quilt she was nearly done with. Yellow squares shimmered soft in the glow, each stitch a small act of hope toward the life she was trying to prepare for. But tonight, her fingers felt stiff, distracted. Every gust of wind made her look up too fast, only to sink back again when it turned out to be nothing but shifting snow. Then a hard knock at the door made her jump, the quilt slipping from her lap. Company was rare in these parts, even in spring. In a snowstorm, near impossible. She eased herself to her feet, pregnancy making the task clumsy, and opened the door. There stood Hank Dobbs, his beard stiff with ice and worry etched deep in his face. "Hank?" she said, startled. "What on earth are you doing out in this weather?" "Miss McGraw," he said, his breath fogging in the cold. "I'm sorry for the unannounced visit. May I come in? There's something you need to hear." The way he said it twisted her stomach with unease. Still, she stepped aside. He stomped snow from his boots and took off his hat. His hair was damp with sweat, even in the freezing cold. "Did something happen to Mabel? Or the kids?" she asked quickly. "No, they're just fine. But there's talk in town, Miss McGraw, and it concerns you and young Wade Calder." Josie felt her chest tighten, a chill creeping through her despite the fire's warmth. "What sort of talk?" Hank shifted uncomfortably, his face lined with hesitation. Folks are saying things, ugly things, that Wade's been visiting you far too often for a man engaged to another, that it ain't proper. That's absurd, she snapped. Wade's been neighborly. He's helped with chores, that's all. I know, Hank said gently. I know, and you know. But around here, truth don't hold much weight when scandal's got momentum, especially when a woman in your shoes is involved. And the man in question's got a name and a fiancée like Clarabelle Vane. Josie sat down hard, the world seeming to sway under her. She'd been so focused on guarding her heart, she hadn't stopped to consider how it all looked to others. She hadn't thought about the whispers. What exactly are people saying? She asked quietly. That Wade's gone and shamed himself, Hank said. That he's dragging his boots on marrying Clarabelle 'cause he's sweet on you. That he's been sneaking around with a woman some folks already wrote off. Josie's breath caught in her throat. They're saying Silas Calder is fit to burst with fury. That he's threatened to cut Wade off if he doesn't put an end to this, whatever this is. Each word hit like a cold slap. She'd known their closeness was risky, but she hadn't grasped just how quickly it could all unravel. His name, his future, his standing with a powerful family. Hank, you have to believe me. Nothing improper's happened between us. Wade he's helped me with what I couldn't manage alone. I do believe you, Josie. But out here, belief don't weigh much next to appearances. And appearances can burn a man alive before the truth even gets out of bed. He looked at her with real sadness. In a town this small, sometimes what folks think they see is more dangerous than what actually happened. Josie pressed her palms against her face, trying to think through the weight of it all. If gossip had made it all the way to the Dobbs place 6 miles out, then surely the Calder family had heard, and worse, so had Clarabelle Vane's folks. Wade Calder's name was being dragged through the mud because of her. The very thing she'd feared from the beginning and failed to stop. What should I do? She whispered. Nothing, Hank Dobbs said, his voice steady. You haven't done a thing wrong. You don't deserve to suffer for the narrow minds of others. But, he added gently, I figured you should know, just in case someone comes knocking with demands or accusations. After Hank left, Josie sat before the fire, staring into the flickering flames, trying to gather her thoughts. Her worst fear was unfolding in real time. She'd tried to keep things proper, keep their friendship clean. But even that hadn't protected Wade. Just him showing up had been enough to give folks something to whisper about. She was still lost in thought when another knock came, sharper this time. Josie opened the door and found herself staring at a woman she had never met, but knew instantly. Clarabelle Vane. Even in plain traveling clothes, she was stunning. Blonde, poised, her posture tight with anger barely held in check. Miss McGraw, she said coldly, I believe we need to talk. Josie had never laid eyes on her before, but there was no mistaking who she was. She looked every inch the refined Lady Wade was supposed to marry. Standing there in her damp work dress, belly swollen under the worn fabric, hair slipping free of its braid, Josie felt like a laborer next to royalty. Miss Vane, she said stiffly, this is unexpected. I'm sure it is. May I come in? Josie wanted to say no. She could already feel the confrontation coming like a thunderhead. But manners won out. She stepped back reluctantly and watched as Clarabelle swept inside, eyes roving over the humble cabin without saying a word. You've built yourself quite a little nest, Clarabelle said, tone flat but cutting. Very rustic. It suits me, Josie replied. I'm sure it does. And apparently it suits Wade as well, seeing how often he comes calling. The words dropped like a blade. Josie squared her shoulders, refusing to shrink. Mr. Calder's helped me with chores I couldn't manage alone. That's all. That's all? Clarabelle let out a bitter laugh. Do you take me for a fool, Miss McGraw? For months he's been distant, absent. Won't talk about the wedding, skips every social event, and rides out here near daily. And I'm supposed to believe it's because you need help chopping firewood? I don't know what you're supposed to believe, Josie said quietly. I only know what's true. The truth, Clarabelle snapped, is that you've enchanted him somehow, turned his head with some tragic damsel act. Now he's chasing dreams of rescuing a fallen woman. That phrase, fallen woman, struck like a slap, but Josie held her ground. I haven't bewitched anyone, nor have I asked for rescuing. I've told Mr. Calder I can handle things just fine on my own. Oh, have you? Clarabelle's eyes narrowed. Because from where I stand, it looks like you've been feeding the fire just enough to keep him burning, without ever taking responsibility. That's not true, isn't it? Clarabelle's voice was icy. A poor, lonely woman, pregnant and fierce, just vulnerable enough to stir up every gallant instinct in a man like Wade. That kind of independent woman? She's dangerous and clever. Josie felt her chest tighten, heat rising like a prairie blaze. You don't know a thing about me, Miss Vane, or what I've been through, Josie said quietly, though her voice held firm. I came out here to Montana to carve out a life for me and my child, not to meddle in anyone else's affairs. And yet here we are, Clarabelle said, her voice laced with venom, discussing how to salvage my engagement from the wreckage of your so-called independence. If your engagement's falling apart, Josie replied, maybe the issue lies between you and Mr. Calder, not anyone else. Clarabelle's eyes sparked like flint. There's nothing wrong between Wade and me, she snapped. We've known each other since we were children. Our families have been planning this union for years. We're a perfect match in every way. The only thing standing in the way is you. I'm not standing anywhere near him. Josie shot back. I haven't seen Mr. Calder in weeks. His father put a stop to it. But if Wade's still thinking about me, then maybe that says something you don't want to hear. Clarabelle's lips thinned. He's acting like a fool over you, and it's humiliating. For me, for his family, for everyone. Josie sank into her chair, the weight of the words and the ache in her back pressing her down. What is it you want from me, Miss Vane? I want you gone. The words landed like a fist. Come again? Josie asked, though she'd heard perfectly well. Leave Montana, Clarabelle said coolly. Go east, go south, go wherever you please. Just get far enough away that Wade can forget you and return to the life he's meant to live. This is my life, Josie said. I've built something here. I've prepared for my child to be born here. You've built a shack in the wilderness and convinced yourself it's a home, Clarabelle said with a sniff. That's not the same thing. Josie felt the sting behind her eyes, but refused to let tears fall. Not in front of this woman, who saw her as nothing more than a weed to be plucked and thrown aside. Miss Vane, she said, steadying her breath. I know the gossip has made things uncomfortable, but I won't walk away from everything I've worked for just to make your wedding prettier. Can't you? Clarabelle said, voice like ice. Because I think you'll find this community can turn mighty cold. Supplies might stop arriving, folks might stop visiting. Help might not be so easy to come by when the time comes. It was spoken with eerie politeness, but the message was plain as a pistol. Clarabelle Vane had the means to make life hell for Josie McGraw, and she wasn't bluffing. Are you threatening me? I'm laying out reality, Clarabelle said. You're alone, no husband, no kinfolk, a past folks don't understand. Your presence here is stirring up trouble among good, respected families. People will have to choose sides. Her smile was razor thin, and you won't like the side they pick. Josie looked at her, really looked, at the crisp blonde hair, the spotless gloves, the cold composure behind every cruel word. This was the woman Wade Calder was expected to marry, the woman who'd raise his children, share his life. The thought was almost laughable. I won't be scared off, Miss Vane, Josie said, her voice like iron. Not by you, not by gossip. This land, this cabin, it's mine, and I'm not leaving. Even if it ruins Wade's life? Clarabelle challenged. Because whether you admit it or not, that's exactly what's happening. Every day you stay, his reputation takes another hit. His father's already said he'll cut him off completely if he doesn't cut ties with you. Josie's eyes burned, but her chin lifted high. Then maybe Mr. Calder ought to go ahead and marry you. Put an end to all the talk once and for all. He should, Clarabelle said coldly, rising from her seat with the grace of a snake. But he won't. Not while he's still chasing some fantasy he's wrapped around you. Her every movement was precise, deliberate, like a woman used to control. Miss McGraw, she added, adjusting her gloves, I'll leave you with time to think. Consider carefully if clinging to your pride is worth wrecking the future of a good man, one who deserves more than to be ruined by foolish notions of loyalty. When Clarabelle Vane stepped out into the snow, silence fell heavy around Josie. She sat there, staring at the little cradle by the hearth, the one she'd sanded smooth and carved with her own calloused hands, full of dreams and promises. The cabin, the firewood stacked for winter, every stitch of her life here in Montana suddenly felt small, fragile, like one gust of wind might tear it all down. It wasn't just the threat Clarabelle had laid bare, that Josie could likely survive. No, what shook her was the bitter truth she couldn't shake. That her mere presence was hurting Wade in ways she couldn't undo. That no matter her intentions, she'd become a wedge between him and everything he was supposed to be. She'd run west to bury the wreckage of her past. But instead, she'd sparked the new trouble. Trouble that now reached for a man she'd tried not to care about and failed. The solitude she once yearned for now felt like a sentence, and the fierce independence she'd bled for. It rang hollow if it came at the cost of someone else's future. The child stirred in her belly, restless beneath her palm, as if sensing the weight pressing on her soul. Soon, she would no longer decide for just herself. Every step forward would shape a life that hadn't asked for any of this. Beyond the frosted window panes, snow kept falling, quiet and cruel. A world painted white as if clean, though Josie knew better. Love, however real, wasn't always enough. Not out here. Not when a woman's past had claws that kept scratching into the present. Sometimes, caring meant letting go. Her hand reached down into the old trunk, fingers brushing something she hadn't touched in years. A wedding ring, thin gold, almost delicate. She held it near the firelight, the inscription still legible despite time's erosion. CW to E.S., forever united. June 1872. Charles Whitmore to Eleanor Sullivan. The name felt foreign now. That promise had shattered not even 2 years in, crumbling under his scorn and her regret. Her hands trembled as she stared at it. The grand Boston ceremony, the sweet talk that turned sharp. The mask Charles wore until marriage no longer amused him. She thought herself free the day he left, papers in hand. But legal chains were harder to break than emotional ones. And no one here knew the truth, that she was still legally bound to a man whose name could drag everything down. A knock at the door snapped her head up. The ring slipped from her fingers, rolling across the floor. Her heart thudded as she stooped to catch it, dread bubbling up fast. No one knew. Not about Charles. Not about the marriage that refused to vanish. Not about the law that still tied her to him like a noose. She opened the door. Wade Calder stood there, snow clinging to his dark hair, face carved with quiet urgency. The sight of him, after weeks apart, hit her like a storm. He looked older somehow, leaner, every bit of him soaked in winter, but his eyes burned warm. "Wait," she whispered. "I thought your father—" "He forbids a lot of things," Wade said flatly. "Doesn't mean I intend to follow every one of them." His gaze moved over her like a hand, reading the hollows under her eyes, the guarded way she shifted her weight, the quiet signs of a woman bearing too much on her own. "Josie," he said, "we need to talk." "Can I come in?" She hesitated. Everything in her wanted to tell him no, to keep him at arm's length, to shield him from the wreckage she carried. But the ring in her pocket felt like a brand. She was tired. Tired of hiding. Tired of lies. She stepped aside. Wade crossed the threshold, and for the first time in weeks, the fire seemed to burn a little brighter. "You look worn out," Wade said gently. "I'm fine," Josie replied, too fast. "Just the usual aches. Comes with carrying a baby through winter." "Don't lie to me." His voice firmed. "Something's wrong. I see it all over your face." She turned away, poking the fire like it mattered, pretending the blaze needed tending. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just getting the cabin ready. Winter's rough out here." "That why Clarabelle Vane came to offer her help with firewood and baby blankets?" he asked, his tone dry. Her hand froze on the iron poker. "You know about that?" "She made damn sure I did," Wade said. Seemed mighty proud of herself, too. Especially the part where she threatened to make your life here unbearable if you didn't pack up and vanish. "She's worried about your reputation," Josie said softly, the talk going around. "I don't give a damn about town gossip, and neither should you." She turned then, facing him fully. His jaw was set, that stubborn glint in his eye she'd come to know too well. He'd already decided something, and it scared her. "Wade," she said, voice low. "This isn't just idle whispers. It's hurting your future, your standing with your kin. My family was cracked long before you ever stepped foot in Montana. And your future, your inheritance, you really ready to throw all that away?" He didn't blink. "I'll shape my future with my own hands, not with my father's leash around my neck." She hesitated. "They say Silas Calder plans to cut you off, unless you marry Clarabelle Vane, and soon." Wade's eyes darkened. "My father's been making threats since I was 10 years old. Most of them hot air, meant to keep me in line." "And if this one isn't?" she pressed. "If he follows through? You lose everything, your land, your name, all for what? A woman carrying a child that ain't yours?" I know what matters, he said. I know what I see when I look at you. No, you don't. The words lashed out before she could stop them. Sharp, defensive, heavy with guilt. You know only what I've let you see. That's not the same as knowing the truth. He studied her, quiet now, eyes narrowing like he was trying to read beyond her words. Then tell me, he said. Whatever it is you're keeping from me, say it. The ring in her pocket seemed to burn through the fabric. That thin gold band felt heavier than iron now. This was her chance. Her moment to come clean, to let someone carry the truth with her. But her voice failed, the fear of old wounds flaring up again. It was too much. There's nothing to tell, she whispered. I've been patient, Josie, Wade said. I've kept my distance. Let you have your space, but I can't keep pretending this thing between us ain't real. There's nothing between us, she said, though even she didn't believe it. Isn't there? He stepped in, voice soft as snowfall. That voice always broke through her armor. The way you look at me when you think I ain't watching. The way your smile changes. How you freeze up every time I talk about leaving. That don't feel like nothing, Josie. She backed away until her spine met the rough log wall. Cornered, not by him, but by everything she was fighting inside herself. Whatever you think is going on here, you're wrong, she said, breath trembling. I came here to make a life. For me and for this baby. I don't have space for romance or complications. What if I'm not a complication? He asked. What if I'm the answer? To what, Wade? She asked bitterly. To loneliness? To raising a child without a name? To pretending we're something we're not just to make the world quiet down? To two people, he said gently, who might actually be happy if they stopped listening to fear. The honesty in his voice broke something inside her. She turned her face away. But it was too late. He'd already seen the truth in her eyes. It would have been so easy to just come clean and believe that love might be enough to stand against the weight of law, reputation, and all the whispers waiting to tear them apart. But the ring in her pocket burned cold against her skin, a reminder that things weren't nearly so simple. Wait. You don't understand. She took a breath that felt like it might break her ribs. My past, my circumstances, they're a lot more tangled than you know. Then untangle it for me, Wade said quietly. Help me see the truth. Josie's fingers trembled as they brushed against the gold band she'd hidden for so long. She knew what this would do, how it would shatter whatever dream Wade had built around her. But it had to be said. The baby I'm carrying. Her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. The father isn't some faceless man who disappeared. He's my husband. The words hit like iron dropped in a still river. Wade's features stiffened as shock rolled through him. Your husband? Yes, she said, steady now. Everett Langston, back in Boston. We were married in June of '72. She pulled out the ring and held it like a courtroom exhibit. Proof of everything she'd kept from him. It was a mess from the start. The moment I told him I was with child, he accused me of betrayal. Claimed it wasn't his. He filed for divorce. But the paperwork, it was never finalized. Legally, I'm still bound to him. Wade's face flickered. Shock, confusion, then something closer to quiet understanding. Maybe even relief. So, you're still legally married? I am. She looked down. Which means I've lied to you. about being free, about starting over on my own. I'm not some brave widow making a fresh life. I'm a wife, left behind, carrying a child her husband refuses to claim. Her voice broke. Wade, don't you see now? This is why I keep you at arm's length. I'm not free to love you. I might never be. Josie dropped into the chair like the weight of the truth had finally crushed her. She expected him to pull back, to look at her with disgust or betrayal. But instead, Wade knelt beside her, took her hands, trembling, cold, and held them gently. Josie, he said, look at me. She raised her eyes slowly, bracing for disappointment. But all she saw was that steady calm in him, the one that had drawn her in from the start. You really think that changes how I feel? It has to, she whispered. Wade, I'm married. Everett Langston might have turned his back on me, but the law still sees me as his. Even if he signs the papers tomorrow, the scandal will follow me wherever I go. I don't care about the scandal. You should, she said, nearly pleading. You come from a family that built its name on respect, on reputation. I could ruin that for you. I already have. Respectable to who? He asked. The same gossips who'd rather see you shunned than admit marriage sometimes fails? The same folks who'd let your child suffer before lifting a finger to help? She shook her head. I mean the law. I mean your father. The expectations of the world you were raised in. None of it allows for me. Wade was quiet for a while, just tracing soft circles over her knuckles like he was thinking it all through. When he finally spoke, there was a quiet strength in his voice that stirred something deep in her chest. Josie, what if I told you none of that matters? Not the scandal, not the paperwork, not Everett Langston. What if I'd rather build something real with you, mess and all, than live a lie with someone I don't love? She blinked at him. Then I'd say you're not thinking clearly. Her tone sharpened. There are more than just social consequences. There are legal ones. Any children we had together would be illegitimate. You'd lose your inheritance, your family name, everything. Wade leaned in closer, steady as a stone. Then we build something new. Start fresh. Raise our own cattle on our own land. Make our own damn rules about what a family is. I ain't afraid of that, Josie. Not if it's with you. And for the first time in weeks, she couldn't find a single word to push him away. The fire in Wade's voice struck something deep in Josie's chest, stirring both hope and fear. Wade, you're talking about walking away from everything. Your ranch, your name, what your family expects. I'm talking about choosing love over duty, he said, calm but resolute. Choosing truth over show. I want a life I build, not one carved out for me by someone else's map. And Clarabelle Vane? She asked, heart tightening. What about that engagement your father's counting on you to announce? Wade gave a slow nod. Clarabelle and I had a little heart-to-heart after her visit with you. Turns out she sees marriage more as a business deal than a love story. When I brought up the idea of ending it, she didn't fight it. If anything, she seemed relieved. Josie blinked. You broke it off? I've postponed it for good. Same difference. She'll find a man who wants what she wants. Status, social standing, maybe a political future. She deserves that. And His voice softened. I deserve something else. Something else like what? She whispered. Like waking up beside someone who pushes me to be a better man. Like building a life with a woman who knows sweat, not just silk. Like raising kids who learn their worth by the calluses on their hands, not by their last name. The picture he painted was so vivid, Josie could almost reach out and touch it. Warm mornings, honest work, a home built from grit and love, rather than wealth and legacy. But reason crept in like a cold wind, the kind that had kept her grounded through heartache and disappointment. Wait, even if Everett agrees to the divorce, it could drag on for years. Years where we couldn't marry, where we'd be stuck in limbo. Wade didn't flinch. I've lived in limbo since the moment I met you, but if we're in it together, I can handle it. And if he refuses? Her voice grew tighter. If Everett gets spiteful, fights it just to make me suffer? Wade's jaw set. Then we pack our things and go. Find a territory with easier laws, or we live like common law man and wife until the papers catch up. I don't need ink and wax seals to know what's real. Josie pulled her hands away, needing space, needing breath. You make it sound so easy. But life's not just sunrise kisses and declarations by the fire. What happens when reality sets in? When your kids ask why their parents weren't ever properly wed? When you're 50, looking back, wondering what you could have had if you'd chosen differently? He stepped closer, his eyes unflinching. What about wondering who I could have been if I'd had the courage to fight for the one thing I truly wanted? The question settled between them like thunder, waiting to crack. Josie had no answer. Not yet. Was she shielding Wade from ruin, or herself from the terrifying truth of being deeply, wholly loved? I need time, she said, voice low. It's too big to rush through on emotion alone. Wade nodded slowly. She could see the cost of holding back in the tightness around his mouth. How much time? He asked. I don't know, she admitted. Enough to reach out to Everett, to see what's possible, not just what we wish for. Wade stepped back, but his voice held firm. While you're figuring things out, Josie, just remember this. I'm not offering sweet words and fairy tales. I'm offering you something real. A life with someone who sees everything you are and loves you because of it. After Wade rode off into the storm, Josie stayed by the hearth, staring down at the gold ring that had once symbolized everything. Hope, trust, a promise for forever. Now, it sat heavy in her palm like a shackle, a memory of vows broken, faith betrayed, and dreams left to rot beneath the weight of the law. No matter how much she wanted to imagine a different life ahead, the quiet flutter of the baby beneath her ribs reminded her that choices no longer belonged to her alone. That small heartbeat meant she had to weigh every step twice. Did she have the right to entangle her child in a mess of unfinished business and legal chains? Did she have the right to let Wade throw away the certainty of a respectable life for a woman tied to another man's name? Or worse, did she have the right to deny both herself and her baby a real family, simply because it wouldn't fit into society's neat little box of decency? As the fire dwindled to embers and silence wrapped around the cabin, Josie sat with the hardest decision she'd ever faced, whether to fight for love or let it go to protect the man she loved from ruin. The question was no longer about her heart alone. It was about what kind of life she wanted to shape. For herself? For the child growing inside her? For the man willing to defy everything for a future with them? The bundle had come that morning, tied with blue ribbon and stiff with frost. The rider who delivered it had pushed through the worst blizzard of the year just to reach her cabin tucked deep in the hills. She recognized Wade's handwriting on the outer wrap. But inside was everything. Legal documents from Boston, a letter from Everett Langston's lawyer, and Wade's own letter, bold, aching, full of unshakable intent. Josie's hands trembled as she unfolded Everett's letter. After months of silence, the man had finally replied. And just as she feared, his answer was final and cruel. No divorce, no negotiation. Instead, there were threats, legal consequences, if she dared continue embarrassing the Langston name with her behavior. But it was Wade's letter that knocked the breath from her chest. Josie, as promised, I've enclosed Everett Langston's response, along with my lawyer's thoughts on where this leaves us. I won't lie to you. It's bad. Massachusetts law sides with husbands, and Langston's social standing makes it even worse. But none of this has changed how I feel. Not a bit. If anything, the time apart has only made it clearer. I'm not walking away from this. I've looked into other options. The Colorado Territory recently passed more reasonable divorce laws. If you were to file there on grounds of abandonment, it could be done within a year. I know it's asking a lot. Trusting me, leaving behind everything familiar to start over in a wild place. But I'm not offering this lightly. I've cut ties with my father, and true to his word, he's cut me off from the family fortune. Still, I managed to secure financing for a modest ranch outside Denver. Nothing grand, but it's a place where we could build something real. Ours. The baby's coming soon, and I know you're shouldering that burden alone. But whatever you decide, know this. I want to be there. Not out of duty, not out of sympathy, but because I love you, and I want to be part of the family you're making. The decision's yours. If you'd rather I disappear, I will. But if you're willing to take the leap, I'll be waiting. All my love, Wade P.S. I'm sending along something that belongs to you, no matter what choice you make. With a shaking breath, Josie set the letter down and unwrapped the small bundle tucked inside the papers. Her fingers brushed against aged wood, familiar and warm even after all this time. Her father's cross, the one she'd kept hidden for years, tucked deep in a box of old memories. Now it hung on a simple silver chain, clean, worn smooth, ready to be worn close to the heart. The meaning behind the gesture struck her like a storm breaking over still plains. Wade hadn't just remembered. He'd understood. Her eyes stung as tears slipped free, not from sorrow, but from being seen, truly seen, by someone willing to fight the world for her. Wade had noticed her holding it once, her father's old wooden cross. He didn't ask questions, just listened while she told him about Auric McGraw's quiet faith and the steady wisdom he carried even through hard years. Somehow, Wade had known how much that little cross still anchored her. Now, as she held it in her hands, thinking of that connection to a man long gone, a sudden sharp jolt struck her back. Josie gasped, the cross slipping from her fingers onto the floorboards. The pain didn't stop. It curled around her sides and gripped her belly like a tight cinch. For a moment, she thought maybe it was just the emotional storm brought on by Wade's letter. But when another wave hit, stronger, sharper, more unrelenting, her breath hitched in her throat. The baby was coming. Josie glanced out the frost-covered window. The blizzard had only worsened. Snow slammed against the glass, wind howled through the gaps in the logs, and she was 3 weeks early. Alone, cut off from everything and everyone. Panic clawed at her chest. The cruelest part. Wade's letter had arrived just hours earlier, full of promises, plans, a lifeline toward something new. And now, when she needed him most, he was unreachable, lost somewhere beyond miles of snow and storm. Another contraction tore through her, and this time she cried out, leaning hard against the table to stay upright. There was no denying it now. This was happening. Not tomorrow, not next week. Tonight. She forced herself to focus, to push the panic down deep. The stove was already warming water. She had clean linens, bandages, tinctures, everything she'd managed to gather for an unassisted birth. She'd read every scrap of paper she could find about midwifery, had pestered every woman who'd ever birthed a child to tell her what it was like. But no amount of study could brace her for this. She moved slowly, between the peaks of pain, pulling out the supplies she'd packed in readiness, arranging them by the bed. Her body ached with every step, her breath short and shallow, hands trembling. Pain came faster now, stronger. She clung to the edge of the dresser, gasping. It wasn't just the pain, it was the fear. It clawed at her just as fiercely. And in that moment, Josie's mind flicked back to Wade's words. His hope, his devotion, the future he still believed they could build together. Hours earlier, everything had felt so tangled. Legal knots, social ruin, the fear of dragging him into a life too messy for a man like him. But now, with her body split between past and future, everything looked simpler. She didn't want to do this alone. That truth cut through the fear like a blade. She had spent so much time trying to shield Wade from the cost of loving her that she'd never asked whether he was willing to pay it. And he was. He already had. She'd treated him like a starry-eyed dreamer. But he was a man, one who had made his choice clear. Grimacing through the next contraction, Josie made her way to her desk. Her knees threatened to buckle, but she grabbed the edge and sat down, reaching for paper and pen. If something happened tonight, if she didn't make it, Wade needed to know the truth. Not the guarded silence she'd wrapped around herself, but the raw, honest truth of her heart. Wade, your letter arrived the same hour the labor began. I'm writing this between contractions, and God help me, I should have written it weeks ago. Yes. Yes to Colorado. Yes to starting again. Yes to a future with you. Even if it scares the hell out of me. I've been so afraid of getting hurt again that I nearly lost the one thing worth holding on to. You were right all along. I wasn't protecting you. I was protecting myself by pushing you away. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept writing, even as the pain built again like a rising storm. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to decide what risks you were willing to take. If something happens to me tonight, I need you to know you gave me something I never thought I'd have again, real love, the kind that wakes you up, holds you steady, and makes you braver than you ever thought you could be. If I don't make it through this, at least I'll have known that love was real, and that I was finally strong enough to accept it, even if I was too scared to say it in time. If I can't be there, raise our child with that same kind of courage. Teach them that love matters more than appearances. That family comes from the heart, not just blood or law. That doing the right thing often means choosing the harder path. I love you, Wade. I should have said that months ago. Josie. She folded the note with trembling fingers and sealed it, pressing it flat with her palm before placing it squarely on the kitchen table, where it'd be seen if someone came looking. Then she turned back toward the bedroom, steeling herself for what came next. The storm hadn't let up. Wind pounded against the logs, and the snow swirled like white fury outside the window panes. Inside, Josie braced herself as another wave of pain surged up through her spine, clenching her entire body in its grip. The contractions were hitting hard and fast now, dragging her deeper into the raw truth of what her body was doing. She'd always thought herself tough. She had been tough, building a cabin with her bare hands, cutting wood, hauling water, fighting for every scrap of self-respect. But this was something else entirely. The pain was so consuming she couldn't see straight. Her vision blurred with tears she hadn't meant to cry. She tried to think, tried to recall everything she'd read about labor and stages, signs, when to push, what to do if something went wrong. But all that knowledge was like smoke now, slipping through her fingers. All she had left was instinct, and a prayer whispered through gritted teeth. Women had done this alone before her. She could too. Lightning lit up the cabin for a brief second, followed by a deep crack of thunder overhead. Josie clenched the edge of the mattress as her body fought through the next contraction. She thought back over the path that led her here, leaving Boston behind, buying a frozen stretch of Montana land no one else wanted, choosing solitude over shame. Every decision had been born from grit and pride. But now, in the middle of this storm, in the dark grip of pain, Josie saw the truth clear as day. Independence didn't mean shutting people out. Strength didn't mean going it alone. Wade had never tried to take her freedom. He'd only offered to stand beside her, no matter the cost. And now, even in his absence, his love gave her the strength to endure. Another contraction tore through her, hot, fast, unrelenting. She cried out loud this time, no longer caring about staying silent. Her knees buckled, and she fell against the bedpost, clutching the cross that had once belonged to Ulrich McGraw. She was alone, but not unloved. The baby was coming, ready or not. There was no more time to think, no more space for fear. She had to live through this. She had to bring that child into the world and fight for the future she now knew she wanted. With Wade, with the family they would build, no matter what others said. Outside, the wind screamed across the land like a beast. Inside, Josie gritted her teeth and bore down through the fire of labor, driven by something stronger than pain, the will to survive. Beside the bed, a makeshift blanket lay folded. It had once been Wade's best white shirt, the one he'd worn every Sunday since arriving in Montana. He'd tucked it inside his letter bundle with a note. Every child deserves something made with love. It was soft cotton, stitched by hand, waiting now for a newborn who'd change everything. Josie's hands gripped the bed frame again as the next contraction hit like a freight train. She wasn't sure if she'd scream or break, but one thing was certain. She was going to bring this baby into the world, storm or not. And she'd do it with all the strength she had left in her battered, unrelenting heart. The storm outside roared with a vengeance, shaking the cabin walls like they were made of paper. Wind howled through every crack, rattling the shutters as if trying to claw its way inside. Josie had lost all sense of time. Whether it was still daylight or nightfall, she couldn't say. The contractions were hitting one after the next, leaving no room to think, no breath to catch. Her body wasn't hers anymore. It moved with a force older than time, fierce and unrelenting. She'd read all the books, all the pamphlets about childbirth, but nothing had prepared her for the raw, blistering truth of it. Another contraction built to a brutal peak and tore a scream from her throat. Despite every ounce of grit she had, she couldn't hold it back. Her cry echoed through the cabin, tangled with the storm's fury, creating a wild symphony of pain and survival. And then, through the blur of agony, Josie thought she heard something else. Hoofbeats, faint but real, muffled by wind and snow. No, that couldn't be. No sane man would be riding in weather like this. But there it was again, closer now. The sound cut through the storm like a thread of hope. Josie's heart pounded. Could it be? Could Wade have sensed something was wrong? Was he out there, fighting through the blizzard on nothing more than gut instinct? A heavy thud shook the porch. Boots stomping snow, fists pounding on the door. "Josie! Josie! Are you in there?" She tried to answer, to call his name. But the pain gripped her again, stealing her voice, curling her body into the next wave. Her fingers dug into the bedpost, tears streaking her cheeks as she wrote it out. The door crashed open a second later, wind and snow rushing in with a man's silhouette. Wade Calder, soaked in frost, eyes wild with panic, burst into the cabin. "Josie," he called again, scanning the room. "Where are you?" "In here," she gasped, just as the contraction loosened its grip. He rushed into the bedroom and froze for half a heartbeat, taking in the scene with sharp clarity, her face slick with sweat, the soaked sheets, the supplies she'd laid out, the urgency in her eyes. Then he moved, fast and sure, like a man who knew how to act when every second counted. "How long's it been?" he asked, already by her side. Josie clutched his hand. "Since morning. It's coming early. I can't stop it. You don't need to." His voice was steady as a mountain. "Babies come when they're good and ready. How close are the contractions?" "Close. Real close," she panted. I think it's almost time." Wade nodded, rolling up his sleeves with quiet confidence. "You feel the urge to push yet?" A flush crept across Josie's cheeks. She was glad beyond measure he was here, but childbirth was raw, exposed, and having Wade witness it made her feel more vulnerable than she ever had before. "Yes," she whispered. "It gets stronger every time." "Then we don't have much time," he said, already moving, adding fresh towels and blankets from his saddlebags, checking her water, arranging the room like he'd done this 100 times. "I ain't no doctor," he added, "but I've delivered more calves and colts than I can count. The steps are the same. I know what to watch for." Josie looked at him through a haze of sweat and fear. "How'd you know to come?" Wade's expression turned serious, all traces of panic gone. "I've been riding the boundary every day. Something in me kept pulling me this way, telling me I couldn't wait any longer." And with those words, Josie felt something shift deep inside her. Something like trust. Something like grace. Wade Calder was here, and together, they were going to bring that child into the world. "When the storm hit like this, I knew if labor started, you'd be all alone out here," Wade said, his voice low and steady. "I couldn't bear the thought of you facing that by yourself." Just then, a contraction surged, harder than anything before, and Josie cried out, her whole body gripped by the primal force of birth. I think she's coming," she gasped. "All right," Wade nodded, gently helping her shift into a better position. His hands were firm but careful, sure in their purpose. "Let your body do what it knows. Trust it, Josie." She gave a shaky nod, trying to summon the faith of every woman who'd ever walked this road before her. But as the pain rose again like a crashing wave, she clenched Wade's hand with everything she had. "I'm scared," she whispered. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not strong enough? Wade looked her straight in the eyes, and what she saw there was pure, unwavering belief. Josie, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. You built this life with your own 2 hands after being left behind. You didn't just survive, you thrived. You can do this. And this time, you're not alone. His words anchored her. The contractions were coming one after another now, each one dragging her closer to the moment that would change everything. Josie found strength she hadn't known she had, tapping into something fierce and ancient. Her whole body worked with raw, focused power, guided by instinct rather than thought. I can see the head, Wade said suddenly, his voice thick with awe. She's almost here, Josie. Another deep wave hit, and Josie bore down with every ounce of strength in her soul. The baby's shoulders slipped free. One final push. And then it happened. The pressure vanished. The room was filled with the sharp, glorious cry of new life. A wail so strong it filled the cabin with joy. It's a girl, Wade choked out, emotion roughening his voice. Josie, you have a daughter. Tears spilled freely down Josie's cheeks as Wade carefully wrapped the tiny newborn in a soft cotton blanket. He held her close for just a moment, staring down at the little face, then gently laid her in Josie's arms. The baby was warm and perfect. Her skin pink, her hair dark, her lungs letting the world know she was here. Josie reached out, hands trembling, and held her daughter for the very first time. She's beautiful, she breathed, brushing the baby's cheek. Is she healthy? She's perfect, Wade murmured, the words like a prayer. He placed the baby against Josie's chest, and in that instant, everything else faded. The storm, the pain, the fear. It all vanished beneath the wonder of this tiny life. The newborn settled into her mother's arms, the cries softening into little whimpers. One hand curled instinctively against Josie's collarbone, her fingers impossibly small but full of strength. Josie traced the delicate features, the soft curve of the cheek, the faint lashes on closed lids. The baby's eyes fluttered open, locking onto her with a gaze that felt ancient. Hello, little one, Josie whispered, her voice thick with awe. I'm your mama. Wade busied himself with post-birth care, quiet, capable, giving mother and daughter space. Yet his presence never left the room. Josie barely noticed, lost in the spell of the child she'd brought into the world. Then Wade's voice came softly, reverently. What will you name her? She looked up and saw him watching them both, his face open, raw with emotion, protective in a way that pierced her heart. Love welled up inside her like floodwaters finally breaking free. Hope, Josie said softly, without pause. Her name is Hope. Wade repeated it aloud. Hope McGraw. And something about the way it sounded in his voice felt like destiny. But Josie looked up and gently corrected him. Voice steadier now, eyes locked onto his. Hope Calder, she said. If you still want us. Wade's whole face lit up, joy pouring across it so bright and full that Josie could hardly breathe. Are you sure? He asked. I am. She nodded. About Colorado, about starting fresh, about building something real with you. I'm sure of all of it. Wade leaned in, pressing a tender kiss to her forehead, then reached down and brushed his knuckle across the baby's cheek. Then it settled, he murmured. We'll be a family, all three of us. Outside, the storm that had raged for days was finally easing, the wind's howl fading into a distant murmur. Inside the small cabin, something new was being born, something not forged by law or tradition, but by love, choice, and the strength of two people who'd weathered their own separate storms. As Josie cradled her newborn daughter close, feeling Wade's steady presence beside her, a deep truth settled in her bones. Love hadn't come to save her. She had saved herself. But love had recognized that strength and chosen to stand beside it, building something sturdier than either could have built alone. The baby shifted in her arms, letting out a soft coo, full of warmth and security. Josie gazed down at her daughter's tiny, peaceful face and felt a conviction bloom inside her. Whatever storms life might throw at them next, whatever trials waited ahead, they'd face them side by side. Hope had come into the world during a blizzard, but she'd grow up wrapped in the kind of love that didn't falter when skies turned dark. The new cabin door stood tall behind them, Wade's idea, built together during Josie's recovery from childbirth. Solid pine, heavy iron hinges they'd forged by hand. That door wasn't just wood and metal. It was a promise of strength, of partnership, of a future they'd shape together. Now, 3 weeks since Hope's first cry, that door had become the line between past and future. Josie sat in a rocking chair by the fire, nursing her daughter while Wade moved quietly behind her, packing up the last of their belongings. Tomorrow, they'd leave Montana for the Colorado Territory, leaving behind the life Josie had carved out with blistered hands and stubborn will. It wasn't easy. Even knowing it was the right thing, it still felt like ripping up roots she'd planted in her soul. But the choice had been made clear after Everett Langston's latest letter arrived, just days after Hope was born. Josie, through certain channels, I've been informed that you have birthed a child while still legally bound to me. This scandalous disregard for moral conduct and social expectation is intolerable. I intend to pursue legal action to claim custody of the child as my rightful heir, regardless of the truth of its lineage. Your defiance has brought disgrace upon the Langston name. I expect your immediate return to Boston with the child, or I will have no choice but to bring the authorities into this matter. I trust you will make the reasonable decision. Everett Langston. The threat was crystal clear. Return to a cold, loveless union and surrender the future of her daughter, or fight a legal battle stacked against her by wealth and influence she could never match. But Wade had offered a third path. Vanish. Begin again in the wilds of Colorado Territory, where the name Langston held no sway and the laws might offer a fighting chance. You having second thoughts? Wade asked quietly as he tightened the straps on their travel pack, catching the faraway look in her eyes. About leaving? Josie replied, turning back to him. Not one bit. Do you ever wonder if we're asking too much of ourselves? Josie asked, voice barely above the crackle of the fire. Sometimes, Wade said as he set down the coil of rope he'd been wrapping and walked over, settling on the arm of her chair. But Josie, we've already been through this. He reached out, brushed his fingers along the baby's blanket. I'm not giving up anything I care to keep. Your inheritance, your family's good name, the standing you had in this town. Wade gave a quiet, humorless chuckle. My father's money always came with chains. I'm not interested in being owned, even by blood. And that so-called family pride, it was never meant for me, only for the version of me they tried to mold. He nodded toward the frost-covered window. And this town, they never saw us. Never would have. Not the real us. Josie adjusted baby Hope against her shoulder, gently patting her back, eyes thoughtful. What about regret? What if someday you're 40, breaking your back in the dirt for half the comfort you'd have had if you'd married Clarabelle Vane instead? Wade didn't even flinch. Then I'll know I chose the life that was mine, not the one someone tried to hand me like a leash. That quiet certainty in his voice still caught her off guard after all these weeks. He met the unknown the same way he did everything else, with unwavering steadiness, as though love was a foundation solid enough to weather anything. Josie's tone softened. Your mama came by yesterday while you were out hunting, brought some baby clothes and a few jars of jam for the trail. Wade's jaw tensed slightly. How'd it go? She's proud of you, Josie said gently. But scared too. She asked if I really understood what I was asking you to leave behind. Wade's brow furrowed. And what did you tell her? I told her you'd given up nothing, that you'd chosen this with your whole heart even when I tried to talk you out of it. Martha Calder had been the hardest part of walking away from Montana. Unlike Silas Calder, who'd met the news with fire and fury, Martha's reaction had been quieter, grudging, but layered with love and fear. She didn't try to stop them, but she hadn't embraced it either. She loves you, Josie said, eyes on the flames. Even if she can't say she approves, I know she loves you. That's what makes it tough, Wade admitted. Knowing I'm disappointing the one person whose opinion ever really mattered to me. She said one more thing. Josie hesitated, recalling the woman's parting words. She said sometimes, the deepest kind of love is letting someone make their own mistakes, even if you're sure they're wrong. You think she believes we're making a mistake. She thinks we're risking everything on something uncertain. But she also said she'd rather see you poor and happy than rich and miserable. Wade sat quiet, eyes on the sleeping baby in Josie's arms. From the first moment, he'd claimed her as his own. No hesitation, no doubt. And every time he looked at Hope, it only seemed to deepen his resolve. Josie, he said after a moment, voice low, do you remember the first time I came out here and found you? How could I forget? She smiled faintly. You saw me swinging an axe like a mad woman and still didn't run. I saw a woman fierce as hell, fighting for a life no one else believed in but her. You were standing in the cold, splitting logs with fire in your eyes. I thought you were the most extraordinary soul I'd ever laid eyes on. She blinked against the burn in her eyes. I was furious you showed up. Thought I had something to prove, like needing help was weakness. You didn't need help, Wade said softly. You just needed someone who'd stand beside you, not in front. You needed a partner. There's a difference. Is there? Josie asked softly. Help means you're stepping in where someone's falling short, Wade replied, voice low. Partnership's different. It's two people choosing to shoulder the burden together, because they can do more side by side than they ever could alone. The words hit Josie deeper than she expected. For so long, she'd poured all her pride into being entirely self-reliant. She hadn't considered that choosing to share the weight wasn't weakness, but strength of another kind. Two capable souls, forging a life not out of desperation, but intention. A soft knock broke the moment. Wade stood and crossed the room. She heard familiar voices on the porch before the door swung open. Hank and Mabel Dobbs stepped in, Mabel bustling forward with her arms full of wrapped food and tiny clothes. Miss McGraw, she said warmly. "We couldn't let y'all ride off without proper supplies." Hank followed behind, slower and more serious, his lined face showing quiet worry. "That trail west to Colorado's tough this time of year. Snow still sits thick in them high passes. We'll manage." Wade answered with calm conviction. "We plan to swing south through Denver, add some miles, but safer for the little one." "Good, good." Hank nodded. "You have a telegraph address for when you get there? Maria won't sleep until she hears you're safe." Emotion caught Josie off guard. She'd spent most of her time in this town keeping to herself, avoiding the entanglements of neighborly bonds. Yet here they were, neighbors she barely let in, sending them off with full arms and honest concern. "We'll wire as soon as we settle," she promised, her voice thick. Mabel stepped close to the rocker, gazing down at the sleeping baby. Her eyes turned soft. "She's a beauty. She'll grow strong, happy. Especially with parents like you two." "We hope so," Josie whispered. "I know so," Mabel said, her voice solid with the knowing of a mother who'd raised 6 of her own. "Love's what matters most. Not money, not folks' opinions, not even family name. Love's what makes a child become something good." After the Dobbses left, Josie and Wade moved through their final preparations in steady, companionable quiet. The little log cabin that had once been Josie's sanctuary would soon belong to someone new. Wade had found a young homesteader out of Nebraska who needed a clean slate, just like she once had. As they went over the last of their packing, Josie paused. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" "I think we're doing the brave thing," Wade answered without hesitation. "And even if it ends up being wrong, we'll know it was our decision, not something someone forced on us." "And if it turns out hard?" she asked quietly. "If Colorado don't give us what we're hoping for?" Wade glanced at her with a faint smile. "Then we'll make something else work, together." That quiet faith, that refusal to bend beneath fear, reminded Josie all over again why she'd fallen for Wade Calder in the first place. He didn't treat life's twists as threats. He treated them like a trail to figure out, a challenge to meet head-on. That night, as they stood in the cabin for the final time, Josie thought about the woman she'd been when she first arrived. Alone, pregnant, hardened by loss and betrayal, sure she had to do it all with no one beside her. And yet now, she wasn't leaving with less strength. She was leaving with more. That woman who had once arrived in Montana, tough as nails but fragile at the core, self-reliant yet lonely, proud but shadowed by fear, was no longer the one packing up her life. The woman now leaving had grown in a different way. Still strong, but that strength was no longer stiff or defensive. It was supple, rooted. She still stood on her own 2 feet. But now she understood what it meant to lean, just a little, on someone she trusted. She was still proud, but not just for having endured. She was proud of what she'd built. As they settled into bed that final night in the old cabin, little hope breathing softly between them, Josie turned her head toward Wade. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" he murmured. "For seeing past who I was. For seeing the woman I could become." Wade reached across their sleeping daughter and found her hand, his grip steady, sure. "And thank you," he said, "for letting me become the man I always wanted to be." Outside, the wind moved through the pine trees like an old lullaby, carrying with it the smell of snow and all the promise of a new tomorrow. Inside, beneath the old timber roof, A family drifted into sleep, ready for the road ahead. Whatever came next, they'd meet it not alone, but together. Not with fear, but with love. The old door that once guarded Josie's solitude would now shelter someone else's hope. The family it had once cradled was setting off for Colorado, chasing nothing more than the belief that love and courage could carry them forward. 3 years later, the family garden stretched out in proud green rows, proof of sweat, teamwork, and fresh beginnings. Josie straightened up from the tomato patch, brushing dirt from her skirt with one hand while the other pressed against the small of her back. She squinted into the sunlight, smiling as she watched Wade kneeling beside their daughter Hope, now 2 and spirited as ever, teaching her how to tell squash from cucumbers. The Colorado soil had been kinder than Montana's cold earth. It had given back more than it had taken, feeding their bodies and healing their hearts. "Mama, look!" came Hope's excited cry, pointing to a fat cucumber peeking from beneath leafy vines. "Big one." "Very big." Josie laughed, her heart swelling at the sight. Hope had inherited Wade's relaxed charm and Josie's iron will, traits that together promised a lively future. Wade scooped the little girl into his arms and twirled her until she squealed with glee. "Shall we pick it for supper?" he asked. "Yes," she cried. "And flowers for the table." Josie watched them weave through the garden, father and daughter wrapped in their own little world. Hope talked a mile a minute, and Wade listened like every word mattered. That quiet joy, that simple rhythm. It was the kind of peace she'd once believed out of reach. Then came the sound of hoofbeats. All 3 looked up. A lone rider approached the ranch house, a solid, comfortable place they'd built in their 2nd year, once their cattle herd had grown and fortune had turned their way. "Company," Wade said calmly, settling Hope on his shoulders so she could see. "Looks like official business." Josie's stomach fluttered with a touch of old anxiety. That feeling never vanished entirely. Even with 3 steady years behind them, any stranger carried the faint scent of trouble. The rider dismounted, a young man in a telegraph uniform. Josie's shoulders tensed. Telegrams weren't known for bringing good tidings, especially to folks who'd made a life by stepping away from the past. "Mrs. Calder?" the messenger asked, flipping through his delivery book. Josie and Wade exchanged a look. They'd been living as man and wife ever since they crossed the Colorado line. And now it seemed the world hadn't forgotten their names. Though they'd never had a preacher or written license, Colorado recognized common law marriage. And somewhere along the way, the law had caught up with the truth in Josie's heart. The lines had blurred so gradually that sometimes she forgot they hadn't ever stood before a judge. "I'm Josie Calder," she said, steadying her voice as she reached for the telegram, her hands just faintly shaking. The message was short, but it struck like thunder. Everett Langston deceased. Sudden heart failure. Stop divorce proceedings. No longer necessary. Stop. You are free to remarry. Stop. Condolences and congratulations. Stop. Attorney Blackwood, Boston. Josie read it once, then again. Everett was gone, and with him, the last legal chain tying her to a life she'd already walked away from. No court ruling, no paperwork, just death's final punctuation. She was free. Wade, watching her face shift, asked gently, "What is it?" Josie passed him the telegram, watching as he scanned the words, his jaw tightening just a fraction. Hope, nestled in his arms, quieted, sensing the weight in the air. "Well," Wade said at last, low and quiet. "Didn't see that coming." I don't know what I feel, Josie admitted. Relief, mostly. But there's guilt, too. I never wanted him to die. For all he did, I never wished him harm. Of course you didn't, Wade said simply. That's not who you are. They stood together a moment, the quiet of the garden wrapping around them. Hope wriggled in his arms, growing restless, and he gently set her down. She darted off, chasing butterflies between the flower beds, her giggles breaking the silence. So, Wade murmured, his gaze trailing after their daughter. We can make it official now, if you want to. Josie turned to the man who'd been everything but her husband in name for 3 years. He had taken her daughter in as his own, built a life beside her, not out of obligation, but from daily choice. Do we have to make it official? Have to? He shook his head. No, but maybe I'd like to. She caught the tone in his voice, soft but sure. Not because it changes what we've built, he added, but because I want to stand up in front of folks, our neighbors, our friends, and say out loud what we've lived every day. Not a law, a celebration. Josie held his eyes, and in that look saw every trial they'd weathered, the hardship, the rebuilding, the quiet trust that had taken root in wild soil. This wasn't about legality. It was about choosing again in the open. Yes, she said, surprised by how sure she felt. I want that. I'd like it very much. Wade's grin bloomed like morning light, cresting over the ridge. Really? He asked. Really, she smiled. But nothing fancy, just something honest. The Dobbses could ride down from Montana. My mother might even come, if we give her a bit of warning. At the mention of her mother, Josie felt a warmth in her chest. Martha Calder had taken time to come around, but the birth of Hope had softened even her sharp edges. There's something about a grandbaby that does that, makes even the most rigid of hearts loosen their grip. She'd love that, Josie said softly. And Hope would too. Gamma! Hope squealed from the flower bed, having caught wind of the conversation. Any mention of her grandmother was a surefire way to spark excitement. Gamma comes soon. Yes, sweetheart, Josie called back with a laugh. Maybe real soon. As they strolled toward the house, hand in hand, Josie found herself turning over the long road that had brought her here. 3 years ago, she'd crossed into Montana like a ghost, fleeing a life that never fit, aching to prove she could do it alone. And now here she was, not just surviving, but living. The woman walking through the Colorado garden with her found family by her side had come to understand that real strength wasn't about standing alone. It was in the quiet bravery of trusting and being trusted in return. The ranch they worked wasn't grand by Wade's family standards, but it was theirs, in a way old money could never touch. Every fence post, every repaired gate, every bit of progress, they'd earned it together, side by side, through sweat, grit, and shared sacrifice. As they reached the porch, Wade slowed. Josie, he said, glancing at her with that look he saved only for the moments that mattered. Can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? I mean, really happy. Not just getting by, not just content, but full-hearted, soul-deep happy? Josie took a moment. She let her eyes roam across the land they'd brought back to life. The garden blooming under her hands, the cozy house echoing with laughter, the little girl they were raising in love, not duty. Then she looked at the man who'd stood with her when she was nothing but dust and defiance, who'd seen her worth when even she had doubts. Yes, she said softly. I'm happy in a way I never thought I'd earn. Even without the name, the wealth, the social standing you grew up with. Maybe especially without those things. This life, this is ours. And that makes all the difference. Wade nodded, a shared understanding blooming in the silence between them. The things they'd once chased, security, approval, stability, had faded in comparison to what they'd built. Love, respect, and the kind of peace that comes from knowing who you are and who you've chosen. That evening, they sat on the porch as twilight gathered, watching little Hope skip barefoot across the yard, chasing fireflies like stardust come to life. Josie's thoughts drifted to the letter she'd write to Attorney Blackwood, closing that old chapter for good. The one that started with Everett Langston's promises and ended in silence and betrayal. But mostly, her heart leaned into the road ahead, wide and open like the prairie beyond their fence line. A path not easy, but theirs to walk, a future filled with hard days, maybe, but honest ones, and shared. Hope toddled back and climbed into Josie's lap, warm and wiggly, the way only a child so deeply loved can be. "Mama, sing the garden song," she murmured, resting her head on Josie's chest. Josie smiled and began, her voice soft as dusk, humming the little tune she'd made up long ago about planting, growing, and tending what matters most. Wade's voice joined hers, low and steady, their harmony as natural as the life they'd built. Later, once Hope was tucked in and the stars had scattered across the sky, they sat by the fire, mapping out the days to come. Not dreams of riches or status, but plans to grow the herd, mend the roof before first frost, maybe build an extra stall in the barn, and raise their girl to know that love isn't luck. It's a choice you keep making every damn day. The telegram that once felt like thunder now sat forgotten on the kitchen table. Everett Langston's death had made them legally free, but their true freedom had started years ago. The first time they'd chosen each other. No signatures, no preacher, just grit and grace and a whole lot of faith. Outside, the Colorado night wrapped the valley in stillness, the kind that settles deep when the day's work is done and the love you've sown has taken root. Inside their little home, the family prepared for rest, knowing that come morning there'd be watering to do, cattle to check, and 100 things to tend to. But they'd meet it all with willing hands and grateful hearts. Because here, on this patch of land, they weren't just surviving. They were home. That night, Josie McGraw drifted off to sleep with Wade Calder's arm wrapped around her, the quiet rhythm of little Hope's breathing floating in from the next room. Her mind wandered to the journey they'd walked. Out from the hardest, rockiest soil, something tender and unexpected had taken root. Love, she'd learned, was wild like the prairie winds, unpredictable, sometimes fierce, but capable of blooming in the roughest places if you gave it light and time. It wasn't just about chance meetings or good timing. It was about staying, about choosing day after day to tend to something real when the world offered easier ways out. The woman who had once carved out a life with her bare hands in the rugged Montana frontier had discovered something far greater than mere survival. Josie had found purpose. She'd built not just shelter, but a home. A life stitched together with truth, laughter, hard work, and the kind of love that saw her not as broken, but as brave. And as sleep pulled her under, Josie held one last thought close to her heart. This quiet, extraordinary life of hers was worth more than any fortune, more than anyone's approval, more than all the polished dreams society once promised. It was real. And it was hers. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you. Truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.